breakthrough. In 1980, he created an equation of his own, one that combined all of the Julius sets into a... When Mandelbrot iterated his equation, he got his own set of numbers. Graphed on a computer, it was a kind of roadmap of all the Julius sets, and quickly became famous as the emblem of fractal geometry. The Mandelbrot set.
It's not easy to describe the Mandelbrot set visually. It looks like a man, it looks like a cat, it looks like a cactus, it looks like a cockroach. It's got little bits and pieces that remind us of almost anything that you can see out in the real world, particularly living things. So it has a character that reminds us of a lot of things, and yet itself is unique and new.
The Mandelbrot set is real, an absolute thing, no question whatsoever. Any mathematician or any computer scientist or student in the school can study it and find the same, describe the same thing. It's a common experience. And so such things that can be magnified forever, that have infinite precision, do exist. But they're not touchable.
Another study.
A geometrical shape, an icon, if you wish, which somehow embodies as an example a very important aspect of how the world works. Somebody recently actually called this set the thumbprint of God.
With this mysterious image, Mandelbrot was issuing a bold challenge to long-standing ideas about the limits of mathematics.
The blinders came off, and people could see forms that were always there, but formerly were invisible.
The Mandelbrot set was a great example of what you could do in fractal geometry, just as the archetypical example of classical geometry is the circle.
When you zoom in, you see them coming up again, so you see self-similarity. You see, by zooming in, you zoom, you're zooming in, you're zooming in, and pop. Suddenly it seems like you're exactly where you were before, but you're not. It's just that way down there, it has the same kind of structure as way up here, and the sameness can be graphed.
Now we'll begin our serious exploration of the Mandelbrot set. A voyage which, in fact, could last forever and ever, much longer than the lifetime of the universe. I have here the full set, about 6 inches across. Now, if I blow this up, I'll increase the magnification now 13 times, and you see more and more detail is appearing. And the interesting thing is you see mini Mandelbrots, replicas, almost identical, yet perhaps subtly different, of the original set. And I can go on doing this. Here's a magnification of more than 3,000 times. So the original picture, about 6 inches across, is now half a mile across. And no matter how it.
All right, shalom, family. Let me actually say the Lord before we actually start going over this. Let me turn this down. I got like 3 different things to take this video down because just this little part right here, this little sound, this part. But let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, honored be thy name. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us on the righteous path and guard us. In your name we pray. Amen. 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 So today,
fair use.
All right. So we're going to be talking about some real sources, and we're going to be bringing out some real information. But today, as we've been going over deep ancient history over the people of the Bible, I want to really express who are the Canaanites. When the Israelites come out of Egypt, of the lands of the African plate, remember, Israel goes into the lands of Africa very early. We even know that one of the kings that was fighting against Solomon right? Well, he didn't fight yet against Solomon, but remember the rising of later Rehoboam and Jeroboam and all that. And then we get one of them settling with Egypt in Africa, right? That's very important. That's something to note because you're going to have a spread of this line of Israelites developing in the lands of Egypt, Africa, coming out the African plate. But today I want to talk about who are actually the biblical Canaanites during the time of the pretty much after the Exodus. Now, it's very important to notice about the lands. Why is this important? Because when we're talking about the lands, we got to know we can't just jump into history and say this is what it is. Rather, let's let history tell its tale, right? Let's let history tell its tale. So we have enough information to know that the Bible is true, but there's also something important to understand about the biblical Canaanites. Now, the ones of Canaan, right? The Hittites, the Canaanites, and all those things, we know those are sons of Ham. But during the time of the Israelites, something happens, and the land goes through basically a transformation, a replacement. Let me read you something real from something right here from basically this museum, the British Museum. It's about the Phoenicians. Now, the Phoenicians are going to be your earliest Canaanites. That's going to be important. Later on, you're going to get a group that's going to come in, and they're going to be called the Sea People, and they're going to be settled in the lower south area of the Levant, close by Judah and Jerusalem. And they are actually going to be called the Philistines. But let's talk a little bit about this, about the Phoenicians, because there's a common misconception when it comes to these people. And a lot of people think that they are Africans, but the history and the genetics and the culture says something otherwise. Let's read something from the British Museum. This urn comes from a religious, right? Pretty much talk about a religious group in Carthage known as the Tafet, where such jars contain the basically what many people already know about this, right? The cremated bodies of babies. Now, that's why this is what I'm talking about. This is why the biblical narrative was expressing what the Canaanites were doing, right? They were burning babies. So this is evidence of it. Small children and animals, which had been sacrificed to the goddess of Tanit and her consort, Baal Haman. Don't that remind you of the biblical narrative? Often a funerary, what they say, was set up over the urn. So they set up a thing, right? Classic rituals of the Canaanites and whatnot. An example with a dedication to Baal is in the British Museum. So that's for real, for real. The Bibles talk about these Canaanites that was worshiping Baal. But notice what it says about this. The style of the jar owes nothing to the traditions of North Africa. What does that mean? That means the Baal worship did not come from Africa, right? That means the Canaanites were not coming from Africa. They weren't Africans, but rather they were a group. Let's continue reading, right? But can trace back to Canaan, right, in the second millennium BC. So that's 2000 BC, right? We got to remember that in 2000 BC, we're going to note something important with that. Let's go and study some things real fast. Before we, and let's get some quick highlights of it, right? Who are the Canaanites? Here's a quick highlight. Canaan was a said Semitic-speaking civilization. And remember, just because they were Semitic doesn't mean they were Shemites. It's important to know this, that Sumerian became a lingua franca. That means everyone in the land will become part of Sumerian, have some Sumerian text. Akkadian became a lingua franca. That means people picked up the Semitic Akkadian, having the lingua franca of the Akkadian text, right? The Hittites, the Mitanni, the Egyptians all did that. They had that style. And then later on, Aramaean became a lingua franca. So Canaan was a lingua area with lingua franca. Obviously, everyone's moving together and everything. But notice what it says. Canaan was a Semitic-speaking civilization and region in the ancient Near East during the, notice what it says right here, second millennium BC, right? Just like it says right here, obviously, second millennium BC, right? And obviously, this is going to be from the encyclopedia, giving some highlights of some things and whatnot. But let's get a little deeper into some deep information. So right before Canaan gets there, so what we're going to be doing, let me actually open up a note and basically idea of the time frame we're going to be pointing out. We're going to point out the time frame up to, said, I'll say like Israel coming out of the Exodus and Abraham's existence, and all the way to the origin of the Canaanites. Now, like I said, it's important to know almost every nation in the Levant gets replaced, right? There's a lot of neo-nations. So by the time of Abraham, when he gets there, it's like a neo-Canaan. That's important to understand, talk about. But first, let me go to a thing here, as I believe I need this little picture. All right. So this is just going to have for the summary of some things right here. Just going to keep this right here. All right. One more for the paperwork for this. And any questions, statement, love, family, let me know, family. Shalom, shalom. All right. So again, as always, no fair use. Everything's for education. We don't sell any of the information. We just give away sources for free and talk about truth. Everything that's used is used for that purpose. All right. Let me make sure this opens up real fast. I just need one more note here. And we're going to dive in. And obviously, we're going to be diving in some material culture, right? We're going to not just the encyclopedias, but we're going to go into the actual material, and we're going to talk about who became Canaan, what groups became Canaan, and it might shock you. And remember, just like we have seen, was not from Africa, but it's going to be very shocking where it actually comes from the north. But we're going to get the full entirety of who are the biblical Canaanites, right? Because we can say who was in Canaan or who were the Canaanites and all those things, but we got to find out who were the biblical Canaanites when Israel's there, right? We already went over some information peoples, right? But today we're going to be talking a little more pinpoint of the diversity of the culture. Let's see, where is that? Right here. Okay, I'll leave that there. All right. First things first, let me open up this. And we're going to start basically from after the Natufian, right? We're going to be talking about things after the Natufian. In fact, right? Remember, we just talked about the Natufian not too long ago, right here. I'm just gonna pull up a paper here, right? And we're gonna be talking about something here. What the hell is this? Let me put this here. So remember, we talked about the world's first farmers and everything, and we talked about what happened and everything during the Neolithic, how the world of the Levant changed and everything. And it pretty much talks about how we know that obviously the basal Eurasians that were there were definitely really interesting, and we had to go into it, right? And they talk about some interesting things of the Natufian, right? So I'm going to scroll down real fast to highlight here at the bottom. I think it's kind of interesting. This one just talks about some of the lineages of, some people don't notice, but a lot of the lineages that the Natufian have, they have some close connections with other groups. Talk about how they also have connections with Mota and stuff, right? Mota and the Neolithic, right? Things like that. But let me go down to something here and point out something. All right, so right here, I just want to point out something here. So you can see in the Levant, right there in the Levant, you're going to see an interesting study of a PCA. Let me see if I can zoom in on this, or if I have to use this. Let's see if I can zoom in. Or I can open this picture. I'll just use this. All right, so you can see obviously Natufian, they're going to be right in the area of the Levant. But what's important is we had already shown that the Natufian, as we see in the biblical narrative, Shem, after they left Mount Ararat, they settled in the lands of the Levant in areas of pretty much where you see Mesopotamia for a long time. Then there was also, remember, while they were still at Mount Ararat, right? When they were still at Mount Ararat, right? Cain was there. Think about that. Cain was still at Mount Ararat. Cain, right? The son of Ham. So the son of Ham, Cain, was cursed by Noah at Mount Ararat. So that's important. So we know he had to at least still be up there in that little upper area. But again, that's going to be order, right? So they would have been over here, and Shem would have basically shot out going into these different areas and going over here as well. We talked about how the Yemenites, the Jottanites went into Yemen, and they also are known to go down through Punt into what was ancient Abyssinia. So we know that the Shemites had basically a connection from here, going over here, and as well. We also have to be careful on the time of Abraham, right? What's going on in those lands, the changing and everything. Because we're going to look at real fast. So this is just a quick reminder of it, everything. So this is also again a connection of the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and the Neolithic, as we got Neolithic Levant there as well with the Natufian. Very close ties, as you can see, right? They're going to have some very close ties, even Bronze Age Levant. Notice it's going to be what you see this right here. This is basically showing that the genetics have a close connection, probably by the mtDNA, but it actually is showing that there drifts in the Bronze Age. Something changes in the Levant in the Bronze Age. Notice that the Natufian is close to the Neolithic Levant, but then all of a sudden there's a change in the Levant, the Bronze Age. But remember, we told you that the Natufian replaced someone else a long time ago. They replaced the older group there. We showed that was basically the original Hamites were A and B groups. And we talked about how the Natufian, the Shemites came there and settled in that place. So that's very important. But then Bronze Age, when the Israelites are coming soon, another group is going to take over the Levant. And we're going to take a look at that. And we're going to get a full picture on what's going on after the Neolithic. So we're going to look at the Bronze Age and look at some things on that. Another interesting quick thing that I need to point out, there's a couple lineages here that is going to be important that we're going to come back to. You see this one right here, UST Isham. That's ISHIM, pretty much. And if you notice, it has an interesting combination. Almost a combination of almost all these lines are going to be mixed with Isham. Almost all these lines, except when you start to go higher up. So from Isham, when you go higher and higher, you start to see this dark blue. This dark blue, and then all of a sudden you see this blue rise up. And that's what you see mostly in the Natufians, this blue. And they got mostly some blue in them. This little, they basically have a different combinations, right? So they're going to be different than some of the groups that are going to start coming into the area later. They're going to actually be a group that's going to apparently, looking at some of the Indo-European lines, they're going to have connections to Isham. And we're going to look at that as we go about this, that these lines, especially in the areas here, we're going to actually note that they're going to be highly, what's the word I'm looking for, related. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see. And this just talks about, some other things like little genetic separations. I'm going to leave it alone. That's just the PCA. It's going to go down. So this goes into some things right here. This just talk about the mix. Nothing besides, there's one more piece that I want to show. Let me go up a little bit and point it out. Right here. So here's what I want to show real fast, this last piece. So look at the Levant. If we look at the Levant area, we got an interesting connection there. Notice first, let's start from the oldest one. The Natufian are the oldest that replace a lineage that was there before. They're going to actually be replacing a lineage that was there. Also, we know the Levant Neolithic has genetic connections to some of the East Africans, like Mota. Right, so we know that's going to be in connection to the Neolithic Levant, because you can look at the pre-pottery Neolithic beat, and you got pretty much EM96, which is the roots of E of there. But notice we're gonna have a kind of like something interesting in the Bronze Age popping up after the Neolithic time frame. So we're gonna take a look at that, and if you look carefully, we can actually follow where it would have connections to. It would have connections to Anatolia, Chalcolithic, Iran, Chalcolithic, Neolithic, and from South Asians and everything. So it's going to have a connection to South Asians, and it's going to say Eastern Africans. So that's kind of interesting when you look at that a little bit and kind of put those pieces together just to get a good idea on what's going on here. As we do know, like during the Bronze Age, it has a major combination. There's also a combination right here. As you can see here, the Anatolians right here, they're going to also be in connection to Europeans and a couple different things. But let's get a little deeper into understanding here. So close that. All right, so this is this is going to be after the Natufian time. Now, if anyone doesn't understand the Natufian time frame, let me know. If you haven't, we got a video. Check out there when we were reviewing. If you don't understand about the Natufian, so we're going to proceed and we're going to work our way to who are the biblical Canaanites. All right, so oldest olive oil ever found is 8,000 years old. And they just obviously remember how I talked about these things. They find them in certain layers. They date those layers by years. So that's going to be something that I have to work around. So for anyone that only believes 6,000 years, any nationist, I am too. But we're gonna work off these years so that we can express them. And as we do, usually at the end, we're gonna summarize it to bring it all together. But we're gonna go about it piece by piece. So we can obviously know that some of the olive oils were there. This is just an interesting highlight of cultures and things like that. I'm just going to close this one. We don't need this right now. All right, so let's get into the actual culture. So I'm just gonna skip that. That just talks about some things of the what's called pre-Ghassulian populations. That's Natufian. So olive oil was in the Natufian culture. So pre-Ghassulian, because we're going to look at the Ghassulian. That's going to actually be linking going back into what are the Canaanites. Just a head start understanding of that. Let's look at another piece. This just goes a little bit more to olive oil. Now remember, olive oil, right? A lot of cultures use it. It's very highly used by the Semitic culture, especially by Israel and other nations. The Shemites were there early, but then there's going to be a replacement of that land. There's not going to be that much Shemites there. It's going to be mostly a Semitic culture, but they're going to be a replaced culture. We're going to talk about that. So we're going to look at something and just talk about, obviously, this is going to be a connection to the pretty much how you would say the Tufian. I'm going to go down to go to the Ghassulian. So we already went to that, and we just talked about the first wave of migration. Now we got to talk about something. Remember what now about the Canaanites? Remember their culture. Remember we seen the vases. Remember they were worshiping Baal. And what did they say about those urns? They said those urns, what? The style of the jar owes nothing to the traditions of North Africa. So that means that these are not Africans. These are going to be coming from somewhere else, but can be traced back to Canaan in the late second millennium BC. So we got to make our way to second millennium BC. So we're going to start a little early, second millennium BC. So 2,500 BC is a good starting point. And that's what we're going to look at when we look at the Ghassulian culture. So the first wave of migration, called Ghassulian culture, entered Canaan circa 4,000 BC. So this is going to be a long time ago. Well, this is gonna be more, instead of 4,000 years back, we can go 4,500 BC until we get to where we're going to get to. So that's a long time ago when this culture entered that land. Now it talks about this is the start of the Chalcolithic in Canaan. Now this one I'm going to fly through because we already talked about this, but this is going to lead to what we're going to get to, and we're going to talk about things about 4,500 years ago and between also 3,000 years ago, stuff like that. Because Israelite enter in about the time of close to, I would say, to sum it off. Obviously, Abraham pops up somewhere about 17, 18 BC. And then Israel will come out of the wilderness of the time somewhere around close to a little before 1,000 BC, right? More like 1,200 BC, something like that. But that would be technically, right, going back 2,000 years from now. That'd be 2,000 off, then another 1,000 years. That'd be about 3,000 years back. So we want to find things in between 4,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago. That's going to give us when the Canaanites exist. So 4,000 years ago, between 3,000 years ago. That's when what we're going to look for. But we're noticing an interesting culture that's popping up in the lands of Levant, right? They're just popping up out of nowhere, and they're going to be with interested groupings. So this is going to be kind of important. Obviously, this one I'm going to read a highlight from, as I already had the highlight here, but this is going to be some interesting information of the Levant. Let me actually read the highlight here. All right, so this is what it reads. This is the start of the Chalcolithic in Canaan. The Ghassulians, right? Original homeland was generally in the area where's the Ghassulians homeland? Generally in the area where the South Caucasus and Northwest Zagros mountain meet. Now that's interesting. Why is that? Why is that interesting? Because if you already seen where we talked about the Canaanites, what did it tell us about the Phoenicians and the Canaanites? This is what the study told us. It said genetically, the Canaanites came from the Caucasus region and the Zagros region. So that's where the Canaanites came from. It's from the Caucasus region and the Zagros region. And then they popped up into the area. So that's going to be very important. So we know that when we have seen a lot of different studies on these things, that we've seen that the Canaanites had came originally from the Caucasus and Zagros. Remember, Canaan was up in the north. So that's important. Let's keep on going into it because we gotta understand the full picture of what's going on here because it's not as black and white as saying they're a bloodline of Canaan. They entered Canaan, but they are going to not be technically how you would say bloodline, but they'll be mixed in by some blood, which will be by the women and some things of that sort. So we're gonna look at some things, material culture and whatnot. So let me get up here, back to where we was at. All right, here. All right. So again, as you see, the Ghassulian homeland is generally in the area where the Caucasus and the Zagros meet. So the Ghassulians are entering into Canaan, but they're coming from the Caucasus and the Zagros, right? From their unknown homeland, they brought an already complete craft tradition of metalwork. Now, this is important. This is important. Why is it important? Because Israel does not have metal. How do we know? How do we know Israel does not have metal in their culture? How do we know that Israel did not have like iron and stuff like that in their culture when they came out of Egypt, when they was in the land? Because there's scripture that talks about the Philistines, right? It says the Philistines did not allow the Israelites to sharpen their or to basically have a smith, right? They didn't even have a smith in their land, right? So remember, they're coming out of Egypt. They're leaving Egypt, not as a war, not that they conquered Egypt, but God's taking them out, and they don't really have much, right? They're rushing. In fact, what's the point of the Passover? They're eating the Passover quickly to rush out of Egypt, to leave quickly, right? And that's going to be very important because that's going to give us some understanding for the land. Let me actually point out the scripture here. I'm going to point out a scripture that I think is kind of important. Let's see. I'm going to point it out for what I'm saying when I say Israel did not have weapons and they didn't have a smith. Let's point it out. As I pointed out with the Natufian, because a lot of times they look at that culture and think it's really old, but it's not really that old. All right, so it actually is going to be first Samuel and 13, and you make sure I'm putting the right scripture. I'll just put the first Samuel 13. I think it's somewhere around there, 12 or something like that. Put this so it's easy to find. All right, so let me read it real fast so that we can kind of get a little understanding of the culture of Israel versus this culture that I'm going to show you that has that. Remember, this is going to be a long time ago. This culture, who the Philistines are, and not the Philistines. My bad. The Phoenicians. This is going to be the original Canaanites. This is going to be who the original or the Phoenicians get there, which are also part of the same group. Let me point out what it says here. We go down right here. All right. All right, let me look at this again. No Smith. All right, 19. All right, so this is where it's, watch what it says here. Now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel. Right? No smith found throughout all the land of Israel. Now, what does he mean? All the land of Israel. Now, he's not talking the Philistines. They have smiths. They have all what they want. All these other people have what they want. But the Israelites have no smith, right? Why is this important? Because to make metal and to make certain material is very complex, especially when you're thinking about bronze, right? Mixing tin with copper to a certain proportion, right? If you don't do it right, someone can die, right? So to actually mix these things takes a profession that is very important. But notice there was no smith in the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords and spears. So that's why you ever hear that saying where it's sharpen your farming tools or sharpen your plowshares and all that. This is the first time where it says, but all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his share, right? All their farming tools and whatnot, his axe and mullock. So remember, they were pastoralists and stuff. So they were sharpening pastoralists tools, right? You ever see where some people will be walking around? You see sometimes they'll use like actually farming tools, like a scythe or sickle, and axes and things like that. Well, some people were using axes and stuff like that as weapons, but it wasn't as great as a sword or a spear, things like that, or something of bronze, something strong instead of a wooden. A lot of these will be wooden weapons and stuff like that, maybe with stone on it and stuff like that, sharpening. So they're sharpening those weapons, but they didn't have any iron. That's important. In fact, there's a law in Israel that you couldn't strike another person with iron. There's a law in Israel that actually, if you strike someone with iron that they die, you'll die. You have to be killed. That's important to know in the Old Testament, that striking someone with iron actually is a penalty of death. So it's actually something to know. You probably seen that one, right? So a man strikes another man with iron, right? Should be put to death, right? But this is an understanding of how Israel looked, right? They didn't have iron, though they're in the Bronze and Iron Age. So that's important about this culture. But now let's get back to the Canaanite culture that came from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountains. So this is going to be very important to understand about this culture correctly. Let me actually open that note up. Pretty sure I closed it. Grab it up. Go to it. All right. Yep. Amen. Amen. Family, you already know. Gotta do it. Amen. Amen. Doesn't it sound like the Hurrians? That's why. Look around us. This is the farm. The farm is not one person. Is multiple people that know the truth. It is. It's about laying seeds and watching it grow. So that's on the money right there. But let me just correct you on one thing. Now the Hurrians what's interesting about the Hurrians, they are going to be more what's the word I'm looking for? They're a perfect example of what this culture is. But this culture is going to be actually before them. This culture is actually going to be much more. Let me see, where is that? Right there. But that is actually what this culture becomes, because they are from the Zagros Caucasus Mountains. Remember, this is not everyone from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountains, but it's some of those individuals from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountains. But we're gonna get deep into that. So that is right. We actually did talk about the Hurrians. Just to give a highlight for that. The Hurrians come a little later. They're gonna be a mixed group, but because actually the Hurrians have Caucasus right here in these connection areas. A long time ago, when these two areas connect, 6,500 BC is when these two areas connect. So that's actually important. Also grows. The Zagros Mountains, these areas here become one. So what I'm going to show you, that's also contribute to that, because the Hurrians in these areas, they become like a mixed combination of groups. So we're going to look at that as we go over there. Very, very important. That was a very, very accurate statement, because technically, I don't want to say anything yet, but it kind of is the Hurrians. So remember, the Caucasus region and the Zagros is going to also not just mix with the Anatolians, but they're going to later move into the areas of Canaan from the north, right? Talking high up from the north. And they're practicing Baal worship. It's important. Okay, so let's get a little more into what's going on here, a little more into what's going on. But let's talk about how the culture look and what's going on with this culture. So this is the start of we're going to skip this one. Remember, we talked about they have metalwork. We're going to look at the exact metal. Remember, the Israelites didn't have metal, but this one does. All right, it just goes on. A massive migration from the steppe is a source. Now, that's a solid piece of information that they had to, if we see that they had connections in the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountain, we got to take a look if maybe in a Chalcolithic time frame we could find that same culture up there, maybe with the same influences. Let me switch it to English. All right, so the center of the northern Zagros during the late Chalcolithic and update to ceramic. Remember, we talked about the ceramic and everything, technologies based on recent file work results in Western Iran. So remember, Iran also has a type of Indo-Iranian, which is a type of Indo-European mixtures, but it's going to be a little different, but it's still going to be of the same families. So we're going to see a little bit of what's going on here, what it's talking about. It's just going to talk about a couple different things. I'm just going to zoom down a little bit on here. Just got a couple highlights, right? Still talk about the 4th millennium BC, Chalcolithic. And it's going to be talking about the areas, as you can see here. It's going to be talking about how they found some cultures that they know that these two cultures are going to connect. These cultures are going to connect, and they're going to show some very interesting ties that are going to be important to take note of. I'm just going to point out a highlight on this one. So it talks about the ceramic, looks at the ceramic. A lot of people already probably seen this, right? You've seen some of the red pottery and things like that. They talked about this before where they said that the ceramic obviously has connections to the Caucasus and the Zagros mountains and everything. So they just go over a lot of those pieces of ceramic and everything, and they have connections to a couple different things. So a lot of different pieces of ceramic, as you can see, right? Obviously, they're putting the pieces together when looking at these things and everything, getting a good idea of what's going on here. I'm going to just zoom down a little bit to actually I'll point out the highlight. So it just goes to the conclusion. I'll just point out the highlight here. All right, so here's a highlight. So again, massive migration from the steppe is a source, right, for Indo-European language in Europe, right? That's pretty much what this is talking about, is that they found out, pointed out. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Let's see. Pointed out on here real fast on this thing. The mountain. All right, down here on the conclusion. Where is that? Right here. All right. So here's just a little understanding on a couple of different things. We're gonna get a little more into it, but let's read what it says right here at the bottom. So it just talks about some things, right? It just talks about, obviously, we know that the Zagros Mountains serve as an interface for the exchange of goods, ideas, and peoples between Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. So we know that there was a lot of movements going throughout these different areas and whatnot and everything. I'm going to go to another one because this one is okay, but we can go to something with a little more meat. I'm going to click this study right here. Now we're going to get into the culture, the exact peoples and the culture. Let's take a look at this and what's going on here. So massive migration from the steppe is a source for Indo-European languages in Europe. Again, massive migration from the steppe is a source of Indo-European languages in Europe. So that's going to be very important. Remember, we're going to go all the way back in time to get a good understanding. Again, well, remember we talk about some certain time frame, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, things like that. We want to get a good understanding of this time so we're not making any mistakes. But again, every last thing we can squeeze out to get the full oil over here. Let me just read what it's basically saying. Western and Eastern Europe came into contact 4,500 years ago. As the late Chalcolithic, the late Neolithic corded ware people from Germany traced 3/4 of their ancestry to the Yamnaya, right? Documenting a massive migration into the heartland of Europe from its eastern, right, area pretty much. This steppe ancestry persisted in the sampled Central Europeans until the last 3,000 years ago, until at least 3,000 years ago, right? So very, very important to get a good understanding on this group. Can be very, very, very ancient. So it's basically letting us know for a long time they was up there. These results provide support for the theory of a steppe origin of at least some of the Indo-European languages of Europe. It's going to be very important because we're going to see an interesting tie with who we know without a doubt is these Indo-European ones. So remember, Indo-European pops up about the transition of 4,000 to like 3,000. Like Indo-European pops up. So it's letting you know that the origin of Indo-European would come from these groups. So the genome-wide analysis of ancient DNA, so it's going to be ancient DNA, has emerged as a transformative technology for studying prehistory, providing information that is comparable in power to archaeology and linguistics. So it's letting you know that it should be accounted as genetics is as equal to major studies as obviously archaeology and linguistics, right? But let's take a look at what's going on here. So who are the ones that talk about here had some ties to obviously Indo-European. Now, again, they put the Natufian on here with the Neolithic Levant, Chalcolithic. Obviously, you see them grouping together. But remember, you want to look at the area in Chalcolithic Iran. So Chalcolithic Iran is where they came from the Zagros Mountains. So we're going to actually note that this group right here is going to have some interesting ties to who we're going to see as a later Canaanite group. And again, we can see, remember we were talking about that, some of the lines on here and everything. You can see obviously Natufian has that major blue. So obviously with some major blue here, right? Neolithic and all that. And then obviously in Iran, you're going to have some of this large green. And then as you go over, you're going to hit some of these purple here. So that's going to be very important. Why is that important? Because it's important to note that there's a line here, right in the middle here, right here. That's going to be a early, as we had went over, CF made an early Japhetic line, but these lines are genetically related to this line right here. This is actually the mtDNA here is interesting, and the Y-DNA here is interesting too. The mtDNA, if I recall, have to look again, is a U lineage. So if you see a U lineage of mtDNA, that's going to be highly connected to some of the Indo-European lines. And this one's going to be a C group, which is a little different from F. So note if you see C or F groups. So C or F groups are going to be what we're looking at here. So there's going to be autosomally, they're all connected to this ancient line, ancient C group, having a lot of connections genetically. So let's take an interesting dive first into some history. We're going to look at the migrations of how they become the Canaanites real fast. So real quick history dive, and then we're going to look at the Canaanites. So we're just seeing a little interesting in between here. So in between, right? So a very, very interesting in between is giving us to kind of tell us what's going on here with this migration. But let's play a little picture before we point out their movement. So again, remember this is ancient time. We mostly point out stuff like 6,000, 4,000, 3,000 years ago, right? Let me point out something now on this to kind of give a nice little summary in a way.
Genetically a mix Eastern European and Caucasus hunter-gatherer. Genetically a mix between Eastern European hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers, otherwise known as steppe ancestry, with an additional 18% from Eastern European farming populations. The nomadic Yamnaya drove wheeled carts and wagons across the open plains, managing large herds, and leaving significant numbers of kurgan tumuli, in whose pits they buried their dead. From 3300 to 2600 BCE, they were the dominant culture of the region, and are now considered the forebears of not only the descendants of the Pontic Caspian steppe, but also many later cultures that migrated westward into Europe and south into Anatolia. Linguistic and genetic evidence suggests that the Yamnaya speakers of Proto-Indo-European languages to arrive on the steppe, along with Hittite elements from Anatolia and Maykop from the Caucasus. These cultures forged the backbone of most modern languages spoken from India to Ireland, from Hindi to Persian to Gaelic to Latin. For 1,000 years, the speaker of Proto-Indo-European dwelled on the steppe before charging forward, usually to the west, south, a series of waves known as the Indo-European expansion, from circa 2000 to 1000 BCE.
So you heard what it said, the history of it. It said that about expanded upwards, right? So what it's saying, what it's letting you know is that all of a sudden, remember, all these lines began where Noah and Mount Ararat. They expanded upwards, right? So they went into the north, expanded, grew up there. In fact, that's how we know that certain lines like J were never in the Levant until about after the Neolithic time, Bronze Age. So Age is what we're going to look at when the certain line is set on these areas from here, right? They're going to go from up here and make their way down and here. They're going to introduce Baal worship, and it's going to be very to note that. But this know about this line that is actually it's going to be the origins, in fact, of Indo-European, but it's also going to be the origins rise later of this later Canaan group. It's going to be very important. So again, another little piece for that as well. As I think always, two witnesses is always good. Another highlight.
Bronze Age collapse. So we are now seeing how the study of language is one of the important subjects used to try and understand the timelines of history. Going back to the Germanic languages, however they emerged or coalesced, there is no doubting their relationship with each other. One of the most important early evolutions of Germanic languages was the one that migrated northwards into Scandinavia and became Old Norse.
You see what it's talking about is letting you know that and that's where Norse came from. It said from the groups that moved upwards, constantly moving upwards, but they're going to come back down, right? They're going to come back down. But let's go a little more into this culture, into the material of this culture, right? Now we're going to look at an interesting study. Now remember how it's seen again from this term, again, how we talk about the Yamnaya culture, right? And we talk about how those groups are highly related, the Yamnaya culture. We talk about how they're basically about the same. And we will talk about how these groups are pretty much related, right? We'll talk about how these groups are much related, pretty much. Just to show that one more time again. Right? We'll talk about movements of the European languages into Europe. And we were talking about a couple of different things of the mixtures and everything of different groups, especially the ones of the Yamnaya steppe herders, right? Herders, right? Very important. Hunter-gatherers, because Europe had a lot of that going on for a while, right? Not yet pastoralists, not yet farmers, or none of that. Hunter-gatherers, herders, high warriors, in fact, right? Let's go down a little bit, and let's get a little understanding of what's going on here. So now this is going to be a little study of. Now watch carefully. Watch carefully what we do here. Massive migration from the steppe is a source for Indo-European languages in Europe. So again, let's get a little more deeper into that, into what we just seen there. Remember, we talk about that Yamnaya culture and everything. We talk about a couple different things and whatnot. So there's going to be obviously ancient cultures. I'm just going to jump down to the highlight here where we get the feed. So here you can see obviously the steppe is going here, but it lets us know that some groups have moved over here and everything, letting us know about some connections of certain groups. It's going to zoom down a little bit, and we're going to point out the genetic families. But notice that, remember those two groups I was just talking about this one. Let me go back over here. This is why I'm pointing out these ones, because we're going to note these two, this one and this one. This one right here is actually going to be what's the word I'm looking for? It's actually going to be a C. Let me actually open up the note so I can that real fast. What exact line that is to show you? Because remember how I said that the Indo-Europeans were CF, and I'm going to show you that they, but also which one of those groups became Canaanites? Not the whole group Canaanites, but there's a portion, a miniature portion that from those groups became Canaanites. And when I say they settled in the land of Canaan and they brought Baal worship, and they became the culture clan of the Canaanites, the Phoenicians and the Philistines when Israel came, and that's the group that also didn't allow them to have. They're going to have what? They got iron. We're going to look at the actual culture. But here is right here. See that one right there that I was just talking about? They found that it's a modern. It's actually a human, a male, a early modern human, right? Modern human, who was obviously they say about 30,000 years ago. They say that about that old. Say old or not? Say it in areas of Russia, and he has a. Remember I talked about that U lineage. He has a U lineage of the mtDNA, but he also has a Y DNA of C. So remember, CF are one. CF are one families. So that's going to be very important. Like we had talked about with things, right? CF is going to be one families. All right, going to be very important for that understanding. All right, that's just an ancient culture that was found in an ancient place. A lot of ancient things found, but remember, we're going to be looking at this line and showing that it is genetically connected to the other Indo-European. So that's the line. Remember this line right here? I'll just say, I don't know how you say that. Kosten key 14, K14. All right, let's look at this K14 is actually K14 pretty much. And this is actually going to be the one that I was pointing out earlier when I was showing you right here, that these lines are basically a mixture of this line that has almost all the mixtures of a lot of European lineages over here. This one right here, this K14. Autosomally is going to connect it to this. Not just this is connected. We see even the step. But we see right here, this line has connections to even when we talk about the step. So you can see right here, for some of the step groups, we can see in the step area, they have some connections as well. Almost like some parts with that large purple. And then there's also another line, which is going to be called Isham. So we're gonna look at these last ones. So right here, UST Isham. If you know, that's going to be making that it has a K group. In fact, let me point out Isham. In fact, I'll just say it makes an R group. It makes an mtDNA R that actually makes U. So this one actually is more of a root to the root. This has a female line that roots deeper than this one, even though this one is old too, but this one is older. But it has a K group that it's a brother of LT, right? It's a brother of LT because it's a K group. It comes from K-M9, but it makes these Y DNAs. It makes MNOSP, which makes Q and R. All those come from Isham. That means autosomally, we're going to see a major connection when we're connecting these things and note that they're the same. So we're going to go and get a transition from, as it says, two major grouping of the Holocene ancient Europeans involved early, middle Neolithic farmers. On the bottom left, we're going to talk about that, hunter-gatherers, and the Yamnaya, right? And the late Neolithic Bronze Age Central European on the top right. Just to get a little understanding, I'm going to show you what we're talking about. All right, so here's what we're talking about, just to get a good understanding. So obviously these lines are up here in the north. So early on, right, before the biblical narrative, when I'm saying before the biblical narrative, I'm saying before, what's the word I'm looking for? Before 2000 BC, right? Before 2000 BC, we're going to note that most of these lines are up here, way up here, not even down here, but they're going to be way up here. Also genetically related to, as we see right here, the groups we were talking about. So a lot of these are going to have some continuity. They're going to have continuity from some of these groups. So that's going to be very important when we talk about the SNPs. So it's giving us a little understanding of the number of autosomal SNPs, right, covered in basically these individuals, 90 individuals. But let's get a little closer into what's going on with some of these mixtures. So obviously we see the Yamnaya has a connection to the corded ware, right? They've been and they have some genetic flow, right, from these groups. Pretty much almost all these groups have genetic flow in between. So it's let us know that it's almost like they're basically connected. So they're on, this is called a PCA again. So zeroed out here. So this will be your middle point right here. And everything is about on this side right here. So we can get a good understanding that we have a good connection of certain groups over here in this area, that they're going to be highly connected. We're going to look back at that to get a good understanding on these lines. I'm going to go down a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna get this little thing right here. So remember we talk about the Isham and this other line. So right here, this K14 and Isham. Notice how close these groups are. Right, this one has purple. This one has green. This one has yellow. This one has that pinkish color. This one has that deeper pink. This one has that light pink. This one has blue. This one has a little mid thing because the just a little different in the autosomal, but it's still, this one also has that light pink and this one has that blue. So you see these are basically early on splits. They will be highly related basically, and it's basically showing that almost all these groups have a connection from these. That almost all these groups have a connection from these, and that's going to be kind of important when looking at the full picture. Let's go down a little bit. So almost at the actual haplogroups. So again, we're gonna see what it says: 96 samples of newly reported on this study, right? Just getting a little understanding of them. Obviously, BC culture. Let's take a look at what we see here. Look at these dates. So these are obviously going to be ancient times, right? This is what we was basically talk about when we talk about groups that's going to come, the Ghassulians. See, look, almost entering about, as you can see, these groups. Zoom over a little bit. This one has an R. The last one's there. BC time was an R1A group. So R1A with the H mtDNA. And a lot of these are going to come from R DNA. A lot of these are going to come from R mtDNA. Just to show that. Let's just go to R star, which actually is from his R mtDNA. Maybe this will show it very easy. Look, notice right here, R makes what? R comes from N, and R also makes B, U mtDNA, because U actually makes K, because U8 makes K mtDNA. Also F mtDNA, R0, H and V, which splits and makes H or V, or JT, which splits and makes J or T mtDNA. Right? We didn't do a lot of deep studies on mtDNA. I should soon. We might do that, but that's what R is. R is going to be that group is going to be connecting a lot of groups together. That's very, very good that we find an R there. Very good. It'd be nice to find an N too, but R is nice enough. So remember, all these are related. Almost all. Oh, there's an N right there. So almost all these are related. In fact, the Y DNA is related. Look at the F. Look at that F star. Let's go to F. Let's go to F-M89. That's actually F star. F-M89 is it's going to be a root. Whenever you see a star, that just means basically a root. Either a root or they don't know snips of it. But this one's going to be a root. F-M89 makes G-A-J-K, H-I-J-K, I-J-K, and everything underneath it. Basically, anything from I-J-K, meaning I-J, or anything under K, dash M9, meaning L-T, or R, or any other group, as we see M-O-P-Q-R-S-T-L-T. All these are from one line, which is F-M89. So that means that we actually found the roots of these lines. So right here, you can see F star right here. So they obviously got F star up there. So all these lines are existing there at the same time. And we can find all the sons, all the families there at once. So R1B, R1A, F star, right? R star, I, right? All these are going to come from one line. T1, right? Remember that's Indo-European. Very important. G, right? These are Indo-European lines, right? So let us know they came from Yamnaya. But also we got to remember that we're gonna have some of the later sons of the different groups mixing up. But remember, who did this? Who calls these lines to all of a sudden pick up a new linguistic family? And who put the families together like this? Was not it God? God is the one that divided the languages, and all of a sudden, about 4000 BC, a diversity of languages arised after 4000 BC. And so Indo-European is one of those. So very important when we think about these things. So this will be after basically what we call Babel, after the time of Babel. when they all had the same languages, but God divided the languages and they all had different languages. As we see now at this time, they have different languages. So we can see where the Indo-European line started. Also, if you've seen, like, we had geneticists like Dr. Nathan Jensen that point out that he actually corrected himself, that when he sold his book and said he was trying to say something else about H, but H is actually Indo-European. Remember, we proved it. C and F is one family. Even autosomally, they are one family. So that's very important. But notice these mtDNAs, right? They're also one family by these lines. So that's gonna be very. But let's keep going, because remember, this is just telling us who are Indo-Europeans, who are the earliest lines that became Indo-Europeans. Let's keep going more into it, right? This just goes a little bit on some things. I'm gonna skip that one. We don't need that right now. We don't need this one either right now. These just extra things that are nice for certain reasons. But here's that movement. So now we're gonna get the movements. So now, shalom, family. Shalom, shalom. My brother, young earth creation. Shalom, shalom. Let me actually point this out. So what's going on here? Let's zoom in, get a nice look at what's going on here. So now this is what happened in the Neolithic. Apparently, after the splitting of Babel, and after obviously Noah had slept, right, died, the sons of the lineages of Japheth and other lines, early lines, moved into the north early, very, very early. And they went up into the areas that became, especially the T group. The T group became the leaner pottery culture. We also get other groups that become other groups around here. Now this is just telling us who are the groups that will be in the north, right? We haven't yet found out who's Canaan, but we're going to find out. We already know that apparently the Ghassulians, there was some groups that were in the north, so that's going to be some groups that decided to come down and take over the Levant and become a new culture for themselves. And that's going to be important. So this is just giving us some more movements that these lines are moving throughout these areas. Right, obviously, Ghassulains in the Yamnaya culture was actually the one that became the corded ware. We've seen that genetically, that the Yamnaya is genetically related to the corded ware. So this group actually would have started over here, where basically Noah was, and they went upwards, and then they went throughout these different areas very, very quickly. Right, it's going to be very important to get a nice summary of what's going on there. But we got another piece to check out here. Let me zoom out. Got another piece that, because we got an understanding of it. Here's an interesting highlight we were just talking about a little bit. When we talk about the mtDNAs, here's just talk about a little understanding. Hunter-gatherers carry predominantly U haplotypes. So it's letting us know about most of the groups, hunter-gatherers in the north of the Indo-European groups had U haplogroups. Early farmers predominantly carry haplotype T, K, HV, HVX, and N, right? And it just talks about some other groups, right? Middle Neolithic farmers exhibited a similar mitochondria profile as early farmers and everything, as U. That's very important and everything, because what group are we going to start seeing in the Ghassulian culture? The pre-pottery Neolithic B, when they start to become farmers. But the ones that's influencing them to become farmers is the ones that's already in the Levant previously. That was the Natufian, that were agriculturalists. But when these groups come together, they hunted all the animals, right? All these people hunting together. That causes them to have to farm. It causes them to have to farm. Late Neolithic individuals mark a second major turnover, highlight by the appearance of I, T1, an increase of U2, U5, U4, H, and W haplotypes. So it lets you know of some movements and everything, and which ones, again, what we're just looking at, as we had interpreted already, to get a good understanding of it. Skip these, just going to go down. This just goes over some things of the mtDNA. Just going to skip it, go down, because we don't need that right now. I just want to point out the mtDNA with the Y-DNA. Obviously, this is just important too, that we're looking at actual cultures. We're looking at actual cultures again, right? I'm at the end. I'll talk these years and whatnot, because we'll work off what we got right now. and point out what's going on here. Right. So going a little down. So this is obviously going to give us that this is going to be after Babel. All these things are going to let us know is that we're getting these rising up of these linguistic families after the divisions of the languages. So this is just giving us some more of those cultures and everything. This just gives of some lands. I'm going to skip some of those things. All right. So right here just goes over some of those haplogroups and everything. We already seen that F star, F dash M89, R star, making all the R groups, R1, R2, things of that sort. F star is going to make all these and everything. Also, we got T, which comes from K. And we're going to look at the Ghassulian time, but first we're going to get all these things down, right? So obviously, it just talks about some things that's in certain areas, like the bell beakers, the corded ware, and things like that. I'm going to skip this. This all is pointed out. All is pointed out, right? This just goes over some haplogroups. This is interesting because this is just giving us a little extra of extra groups. So previous Y chromosome studies on ancient Europeans, right? All these different ones, ages, and all this stuff up to 1000 BC. So this is what we want to see, right? Who was in Europe before Israel came out of Egypt? Who would be in Europe before Israel came out of Egypt? Africa. Who would be in Europe? And this is some of the previous studies. So obviously we know, like we have seen with this is actually going to be most likely that K14 group, which is actually that C group. And that is going to be important because we're going to note that that's going to be one with that F-M89 groups. So F-M89 in Germany, and we just point out that F-M89, but also we can see that E1B1B get up there. Now we got to be careful. Is E1B1B European? Someone might say, well, it's in Europe and is in areas of European area, so it must be European. But rather, no. E1B1B, if we follow it to its earliest culture, it was Natufian. And the Natufian actually show close ties to later the Semitic rising groups during the time of the Neolithic. So that's going to be very important. But they also spread some in Europe. But that's also how we know that the E groups kind of spilled into Europe a little bit. So that's just something to note, to be careful on. So E1B1B is in Europe early, but it is also going to be a line that is going to be more middle land-ish, like basically in the middle. We talked about that. That we point out in the picture. As you can see here, the E1B1B comes from DE YAP groups. It's the only group with the YAP group, and they will be about in the middle here, right in this middle. So it's not shocking that we find them in Spain, which this paper says right here, that we actually found an E1B1B in Spain. As we can see here, if E1B was the Natufian, we also know that we found an E group up here as almost as old as the Natufian, and we know that the Natufian group also, some of them moved into these areas. So it would have been a sweep, like from Noah. It would have been a sweep as some of the E groups went this way and some of the E groups went in this middle area through here down into the areas of Spain. But the ones that we're talking about, mostly of the lines of CF, they shot upwards and then they spread out. So they're going to be a little more higher than these ones. So they went upwards and they went into Finland, and then they go into more areas faster. So they're going to have a large, but they did go into some of these areas as well. We found an R lineage down here. So some of the like Chadic people and stuff like that, they're basically dominant in these areas. The Chadic people might have ties to ancient Egypt and everything. But this is going to be more of where we find E. So finding one in Spain, as we see right there, finding one in Spain makes sense. Finding one in Spain makes sense of those E groups. It's finding one in Spain. But notice, remember, F-M89, again, F-M89 makes all these families, right, from IJK. And we also did find the mid SNPs. We found a couple mid SNPs, right? I pointed out before, we found GHIJ, we found HIJK, IJK, right? Even on this, it would just talk about the right here, a basal paragroup HIJK has been found in said Mesolithic Europe, and basal IJK was found in Upper Paleolithic Europe. So that's going to be very important. But let's go back. So that's just important to know how do we know that this line is Japheth? This is one family, right? You can't have Ham. You can't have all of a sudden this being Shem and this being Japheth. Yet this has an ultimate combination node right here. And what I mean by a combination node is basically like saying if this was Javane, if this line was Javane, which I don't think this is pinpoint Javane, but let's say it's like Japheth, Javane, something like that, then it would only make Javane. It can't all of a sudden make a Shemite, right? If this is Japheth, if this is from Japheth, then all these have to be from Japheth, which is okay, right? And it's nothing to be to deny when we see the actual results are pointing out the same thing. And we see what groups are up there, right? You get your I's, you get your J's, right? You get all the little K groups. There's a K group, right? That's probably Isham in Russia. Most likely that's Isham with a K group right there. And then some of the other groups. CF is going to be one family. CF is one family. One monophyletic family. One monophyletic family, right? Very, very important. One tribe. One tribe. Well, let me go down. Let me go to one piece here. I think I have one more on here I want to point out. These ones we'll leave that alone. All right. So this is interesting for movements or what they basically come, but this one we'll leave alone because we don't need this one right now. It doesn't talk about the Ghassulian because we're going to go to the Ghassulian and how they became the how you say Canaanites. So we're just verifying cultures, important to verify and to establish so that we're jumping on where the Canaanites. We're not just hey, how do we know that's true? So we're going to verify these things. All right. So very, very important. We have seen that, right? Look at that mtDNA, right? Remember we talked about where that came from our mtDNA. So very, very important. We get most of them going to these areas, but remember also some of the E group mixed with some of those female mtDNAs, but that's something to consider as well. But let's keep on keeping on because we've seen almost every son of -M89 there. Almost every son there with F-M in these cultures. But we're going to find out which ones became the groups that become part of the Canaanite culture-ish. So T star, perhaps T1A and T2B have been found in skeletons from the late Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, right? Not Neolithic, Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, right? Respectively from Russia and Sweden. So very, very important. Very, very important. That R is actually, again, when you trace it to it, is monophyletic family, is related to T, as we see right here. T also related to all these, all one family, all going to be one line. But we can see here, that's just going to give us a good understanding on what we see there in these little areas. Now, why is that important? Because just understanding these monophyletic families, so we're not making a mistake, right? We're not making a mistake and coming to some rush conclusions or trying to, because we do believe in the narrative, but we don't want to cut off any real cultures that we found, real findings that we found. We got to note that, yeah, we found the cultures, but again, we know the years are exaggerated, but we're going to point those things out. Neolithic. This is going to be important to point out some of the areas, again, of the Armenian plateau, right? Remember we talked about where did the people leave? They left the area of Armenia, right? They went upwards, right? So Armenia, situated between the Black and Caspian Seas, right? If you already know, Armenia is over here. Just zoom, because not I like to use maps because not everyone is. You're going to learn history and you're going to learn. So right here, you're going to see Armenia. So that's important to take note of real fast. But it just goes on and talks about some things real fast that we need to talk about. This is what we find. Let me zoom down a little bit. Who stayed in the little area? It says we find a striking basically pretty much a dominance of haplogroups previously implicated with the basically agricultural revolution in the Near East. So remember we talked about the agricultural revolution. What does it mean agricultural revolution? It's basically when the Middle East changed from as agriculturalists and went to farmers, becoming farmers. And that actually took a team. It took multiple different cultures to come together to change these things up, right? So that's just a change of culture. That doesn't tell us if they're Ham, Shem, or Japheth, but that just tells us that there was a change of culture. But it's letting us know after the Neolithic time, that's when a lot of these lines came down there, including J2A, R1, R1B, L23, G2, and J1. So this is going to be very important to take a note of, as it lets us know of some things of when these groups moved, right? Come from Armenia, but it lets us know what is it important. However, we detect very restricted genetic affinities with Europe that suggests any later culture diffusions from Armenia to Europe were not associated with a substantial amounts of parental gene flow, despite the presence of closely related Indo-European language in both Armenia and South Europe. You gotta be careful because remember, that's why we looked at the studies ourselves. Just for the full picture here, full understanding. What it's talking about here is talk about basically, they know that they're basically related. In fact, they have all of them, almost all of them, actually show that they have basically a mid Neanderthal mix. But we're gonna keep going on, because we're not more focusing on what we see in the lands of Europe. But these are going to be what we call proto Indo-European, right? So, but we're going to keep on digging deeper because now we got to move this culture that was here. So remember, they were up here, and then all of a sudden, Neolithic, they were here, right? So they were going up there in the upper areas, into the upper areas up there. So keep that in mind. Then they got over here. Now they're gonna decide in the Bronze Age. Now they got some farming. They're ready to make some moves, right? There's a lot of nations. The earliest black or dark age of the Mesopotamian time frame is when the Gutians rise up. A group called Gutians. Well, we'll talk about that as well as we go over these things. But let's go a little down, kind of point out something here, right? Just make it clear on this. I'll just go to where we're here. This is the little thing I want to point out, and let me point it out, and then we'll get to this little culture here. So we're gonna start talking about what's going on here: Turkey, Iran, some parts of Syria, right? Iraq, Afghanistan, and these little areas, and what's happening here. Then we're gonna look at the Ghassulian. All right, so this is just giving us obviously some groups that we find in certain areas there. So they obviously find a lot of different lines in Armenia and everything. They found very rare from Lake Van and everything. They found some E1B there, but that's gonna be from Lake Van. But from areas of like Arad and things like that, you obviously got a lot of those G's and everything, J's, right? You got your L's, you got R's, you got T's and everything. So obviously this line is gonna be there. Notice we don't have all the sons of Japheth all squished together yet. Notice Q is only a little bit of Q and a little bit of N, mtDNA, or not mtDNA, Y-DNA. So just a little bit, and it's just a little bit of a little Q and N. Some groups are smaller than others, right? But they still come from CF groups, right? So that's going to be kind of important. So just letting you know that they're going to have connections in these areas. That's something that they know, but they're going to make some movements downwards. So now let's talk about what this group is and everything that we were just talking about. Before I point this out, right? Let me make sure I point out the culture of the Ghassulians, what we see in the. Let me go down and point this out from a note. I need to get a tool here from a note that I just scanned by. I keep on scanning by. There it is. All right. Amen. Shalom, shalom, family. Shalom. I see you over there. I'm hoping that, as always, brothers and sisters, that for the biblical narrative sake, you're getting a little more deeper understanding of the lands of Levant and some of the differences of the culture. Right? Not to see everything just black and white, but to see things with a little more perspective, a little deeper perspective. All right, so let me actually go to that culture. All right. All right, so I'm going to go to the Ghassulian culture. All right, so I just got to go to the Levant. All right. And we're going to see what we were just talking about. So it's going to be after the pre-pottery Neolithic. So after the pre-pottery Neolithic time frames, we're going to note the Ghassulians come in. And there's an F-M89, which I should point out, that pops up in the lands of Jordan. Pre-pottery Neolithic B, F-M89 with a T. Remember we talked about that, the T and a U5, those come from the same lines of that R, so the same, basically the same families. But this is important to know that that's going to be F-M89. So that brings, again, that whole group together, F-M89. Very, very important that it brings that whole group together. But let's get back over here. So in this time frame, obviously we've seen the Semitic groups basically had shift to getting more groups inside of them, like the H groups and the T groups. So H and T end up joining down there, especially during the Ghassulian time frame, right? Especially during the Ghassulian time frame, they pop up. So about Neolithic, T and H comes in earlier than other groups. T and H comes in a little earlier, right? There's even some said time frames where T comes into the Natufian culture, where T jumps into that group. And but more or less the pre-pottery Neolithic B is when they jump in after this time. That's when they start to later on change things because a lot of cultures jump in. Oh, my phone died. Won't be able to see. I'll fix that a little later. But these are going to be some of the groups. So a lot of T groups. Look at all those T's. Look at all those T groups. But this is where we got to be careful. We got to be careful. What culture is this? Is this Israelites that's in the lands of Israel? No. This group is going to be the Ghassulians. So let's go back over here. And now let's get a good understanding on what we're seeing. Because not everyone in the Levant, just because we find a lineage in the Levant, we got to check the history of the culture. We got to check the history of the culture. So remember we talk about how the Ghassulians had iron, and remember how we talk about how Israel did not have iron, and we talk about that again. There was no smith all the land. That means the Israelites didn't have iron, but the Philistines did, right? They didn't want the Israelites to make them spear swords and everything. The Philistines are later than the Phoenicians. Both of those are still Canaanite groups, and they take up in a religion of Babel. But understanding what's going on here with this culture here. First, let's get a quick this Chacolithic culture called Hurrians. So real quick, who they are.
In Sinai. I'm not so sure that is really accurate. These seem to possibly date a little bit later, maybe to the early Bronze one. These are all, as far as I know, they're all articulated burials, so they're like the grave circles. Obviously, they're circular and well made, but beyond that, the similarities are not entirely convincing. Well, what the Chalcolithic period is really known for, and I had mentioned earlier that there are diverse burial patterns. I did that on purpose because everybody thinks of the Chalcolithic as this type of burial, secondary burials that go inside of ossuaries and then are placed inside of caves. And there are quite a number of them, and some of them are the richest burials.
All right. While I'm plugging my just a quick highlight for what it's talking about. Basically, just this little piece right here.
But what the Chalcolithic period is really known for, and I mentioned earlier that there are diverse burial patterns. I did that on purpose because everybody thinks of the Chalcolithic as this type of burial, secondary burials that go inside of ossuaries and then are placed inside of caves. And there are quite a number of them, and some of them are the richest burials that we've found. So for instance, this is the Picayune cave. This is in the very north of modern-day Israel, very near the border of Lebanon. And you can see what you're looking at is a ceramic ossuary. And this is the top, so it's upside down, it's sat on top. And you can see the nose. This is very typical of the Ghassulian image. They often, all the ossuaries have a nose represented, very often a model big nose, and sometimes not much more. You can see the nice paint on the side. And you can see handles that would have sort of latched on the top. And of course, breasts. You're wondering, well, what is all the molten ice cream all over everything? It's a karstic cemetery, so of course you can even see the dripping. This is still an active karstic cave, and so you've got calcium carbonate. It's dripping all over everything, solidifying. It's a horrible mess, from what I understand, trying to chip the human bone out of this kind of concretion, as well as the artifacts, of course. This Picayune cave we'll return to in a bit. I just threw together a map to demonstrate where the ossuaries are found. Ossuaries are generally found in caves, so the red stars indicate ossuaries that are found in caves. The Picayune cave site that we just looked at is way up here in the north. And
All right, my sound, but this is what it's showing. It's showing basically what it's showing is letting you know about the culture, the material culture, what they found of the culture, and what they had. We know they had iron. We know they had bronze. They had bronze, rather, copper, right? Copper tools, rather. Let me clarify that. They had metal, pretty much, is what they had. They had a type of metals that basically is important to note. Right here as well.
into previously unoccupied areas or sparsely occupied areas.
Let me point out this.
In the 30s. But it was clear that something very sophisticated was going on. And so you're, of course, looking at the site of Paleocasul near the Dead Sea in modern-day Jordan now.
So that's why they call the Ghassulian culture, if you can see that, is because of this land right here, Ghassul, right? Ghassul, Ghassul. And that's why they call it the Ghassulians. Their culture that comes in, they come from the north, they got a lot of metal.
Of the plain of the village. So they excavated. The site is still currently being excavated by an Australian team, but they excavated about 10 years through the Pontifical Biblical Institute. So that it's a site with 11 different little hillocks, and so it's a very large site, very rich. And
let me go to this one right here because I'm gonna go to a little timestamp on this to get a little more into it, and then we're gonna point out some things. Remember, he was just looking out. He's pointing out this cave here. We're going to talk about some things of it. What's going on with this group? What's happening here? So remember, not the whole. This whole line is Canaanites, but we're going to point out which groups became that group by first understanding this.
As I've looked more and more at the data for my dissertation and since then.
All right.
So instead that primary motivation for subsistification and craft specialization. Small-scale societies, such as Southern Levant, was to supply the needs of ritual practice for ceremonies. So to structure this, we'll look at some of the basic facts of the period under study, and after that, we'll turn to a brief summary of the data that's been used to support this idea that there were non-egalitarian place chiefdoms in the Chalcolithic. And from that, we'll turn to evidence for ritual practices during.
All right, let me refresh this page real fast and point out what's going on here. So he's gonna point out the practices that we notice. This culture is not Israelites. T is found in the Levant. F is found in the Levant. R is found in the Levant. H is found in the Levant. Almost any lineage is found in the Levant, but the culture, you have to trace the culture, right? You got to be careful on how we trace the cultures so that we can find out who is who and what is what, right? Who is who and what is what, right? So already we know that before the rise of Abraham and then the Israelites coming out of Egypt. We're seeing that some groups are coming downwards into the lands of Levant. And about 2 BC, about 2000 BC, they become what is officially Canaanites. About 2000 BC, Canaanites. And that's going to be very important. Full understanding of this study, right? That's back to that information, right? So remember, before they came, Ghassulian, we had them connected to the north with interesting autosomal connections to lines in the north. It'll be very important. It's going to point something out here, all right? This one too. That one up. All right, so back to this. Just to kind of finish that little highlight there. Right, just to show that they were there initially for a while. Like they were there for a while. I don't know if I got plays on YouTube for it to play. Let's play it on you. I'll play it on here so you get just see this culture material.
Practices for ceremonies. So we'll look at some basic facts of the period under study, and after that, we'll the data that's been used to support this idea that there were non-egalitarian elite placed, basically chiefdoms, in the Chalcolithic. And from that, we'll turn to evidence for the ritual practices during the period and the equipment involved with these. Well, the Chalcolithic spans about 1,000 years, and we don't really have an internal chronology for that period, unfortunately. It's something we're still working on, but there's about a 1,000-year period there where we cannot separate it down into smaller increments. At least we can't.
So here's where, amen. I'm gonna go to that. We're gonna turn that. Amen. So biblically speaking, when we look at these years are exaggerated, right? Even they say they don't have a full like they can't take, what's the word I'm looking for? If you know how to understand how they're measuring these things, you can understand what's really going on with the world that we're living in today. That actually the biblical narrative is the truth. And after the Tower of Babel, we see these movements. It's just that there a lot of these times are stretched out. They say that this culture been there for thousands of years, they say, right? They say this culture been there for thousands of years, they say, right? But remember, if the biblical narrative is true, which it is, then we got to question if this was there for thousands of years. But we know that it was there, that this culture was there. So that's going to be very important for understanding some things. And remember, this is supposed to be before the Israelites. And also we have the culture ties for these things. But let's touch on some real. I think these are actually important. So if I had to start with the first one, how did the biblical Canaanites get haplogroup J? That we're going to talk about that today. Why did haplogroup IJK mutate so much into so many haplogroups? That's a great question. We're going to point that out too. Why did haplogroup IJK mutate into so many haplogroups? So let's point it out. So how that happened. Now we had pointed this out on a previous video on how that mutation works. So let's say CF is Japheth and he has 7 sons, right? His sons get mutations from him. One son may have C, another son may have F, and that F might make other F groups like F1, 2, and 3, right? So that's 2 sons so far. But F also, he can have a son, right? He had 1 son, 2 sons, and then another son that has F as well. But that F-M89 mutation, that later son gets a mutation of GHIJK. And then another son with F has another mutation later on to HIJK. So that's 4 sons already. And another son has IJK. So that's another mutation. That's a 5th son. And another son actually would have IJ. So that would later make your IJ groups, right? So initially, any one of the sons of Japheth could be any one of those mutations initially, because they would come from F-M89. And that F-M89 almost all of them early on had F-M89, but then they got their later mutations, because even though they assigned them as letters, you got to know that all these are mutations on certain zones of the Y chromosome, right? They're reading the unrecombination, the zone of the Y chromosome or the mcDNA that doesn't go through recombination, and that is going to tell us what they initially are. So by the mutations, by the SNPs, they're basically putting down what they later are by having sons and sons and sons and sons and sons and sons, right? If you follow if you go by autosomal, right, or even just your father's line or your mother's line, if you're a woman, you can trace that line so far back, and if you count from your time to that time, the amount of mutations that actually happen between us to them, right? From our line, for our lineage or E lineage, going from his root, like for E is DE, and for like F or T and stuff like that, it's K-M9, right? So also we know that he can have a son with K-M9. If you want to see the full explanation of that, if you go to my if you already subscribe, it should already show that video, but it should be a video on the first ever video goes over all the sons of Ham, Shem, Japheth on how these mutations work. So right here, this first video, this one. As soon as you click that Synthetic Sunday playlist, it'll be this first video. Summary: 4 sons, Shem 5 sons, and Japheth 7 sons. Everything scientifically done, but I'll show you a highlight on what I'm talking about here. So this is how it basically would work, and we notice based upon how the mutations work that we would get one son of Japheth with C, one son with F, that's F star, one son with GHIJK, that makes your G, one HIJK, that makes your H, one son with IJ, which makes I and J, one son from that K-M9, because K-M9 makes K1, which is LT, and K2, which is K. So it would be a K-M9 that actually would have these two different sons, these two ones that. So early on, basically when Japheth had 7 sons, their mutations would have looked like this. And that's why that IJK, because IJK actually is what makes these, that's how they're all connected. Basically, they're all connected by one node. I'll show you basically the breaking down of it when we talked about it real fast, of the mutations. And we also showed it scientifically, how that's scaled and how these would all come to piece. So right here, like this is where the breakdown is. So Japheth would be CF. So he would have sons with F and some sons with C. So he would have sons with F, C, and F. And those CFs, as they keep having kids, mutation. Remember, this is very important. The biblical tree is larger than people think, right? It's just telling you major nodes in the biblical tree, right? Like when you think about obviously the family tree of Abraham, it goes Abraham going back right to his father Terah, going back to Nahor, then back to all the way back to Eber, then all the way back from Eber to right, because Abraham's from Peleg of Eber, then Eber is from all the way back to Arphaxad, and all the way back to Shem. So there's a lot of mutations just alone from those names. So we can get those mutations just alone from those names. So it's telling us those root nodes. So basically, from Japheth, he would have 7 sons. So that's how that would work. But we're going to talk about how going from the Ghassulian to the Canaanite, what happens. But we have to address this part, the rising of the Ghassulian after the rising of the Indo-European, and then the change of the land, the culture change. Kind of important. But that's gonna lead us to who they are, because remember, the Ghassulians are actually the Canaanites. The Ghassulians are actually the Canaanites, because the Ghassulians are genetically the Canaanites. When I say genetically, they're the ones that came down from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountain based on the genetic studies, and it becomes the group that becomes the culture of later Phoenicians, the sea people, or not sea people, but the purple people, who they call the Phoenicians, but those were the Canaanites, and it also took in that culture. right? But it started off like this. This is how it actually starts off. Let's let this play a little bit more.
Practices for
Oh, wait.
ceremonies.
Not
So to
this one.
structure this, we'll look at some of the
Not that, because that was not me. Or maybe it will.
basic facts of the period study. A summary of the data that has been used to support this idea that there were non-egalitarian elite placed, basically chiefdoms in the Chalcolithic. From that, we'll turn to evidence for this during the period and the equipment involved with these. Well, the Chalcolithic spans about 1,000 years, and we don't really have an internal chronology for that period, unfortunately. It's something we're still working on, but there's about 1,000-year period there where we cannot separate it down into smaller increments. At least we can't all agree on it. Some people have their ideas, but we don't need to go there today. In the southern Levant, this period continues the Neolithic tradition of agricultural communities, already well established across the Near East, of course. The domestication of plants and animals that took place during the Neolithic in the Near East established the foundations for the ability, at least, for surplus production on at some length, and the mortuary practices of the period are fascinating and on them very. This is that's been ignored, that there were the skeletons found in where the hoard was found. So whether or not this should be interpreted as a burial assemblage, there's little doubt that ultimately it was associated with ritual practices of some sort. Well, now I'd like to turn locally at pretty much any Chalcolithic site. People seem to be going to.
All right. Closing it on the other tab because switching tabs like that is kind of odd.
Identified some of the sites.
That's a great statement on that, because that is.
So there's the crafted artifacts of copper and ivory.
All right, just moving this thing up here. All right, so you hear this last piece real fast that he says right
here. The Nahal Mishmar cave is truly spectacular. I've mentioned this in lectures before. It's extraordinary because there are not other hoards like this in the region. It contained the exotic and labor-intensive crafted artifacts, as well as pottery and a few other items. You can see it here in the crevice where it was found with the reed mat that was put together, that this whole bundle was put together in this crevice. When it was found originally, in fact, there was some doubt as to how it could possibly be a Chalcolithic. The copper was too beautiful, too sophisticated. It was beyond anything. It was beyond anything that the Egyptians were doing. So how could it be these agriculturalists with a few pieces of nice pottery and a few pieces of ivory? How was it that they had this? There was some doubt. Recently, this mat was redated, and it was only about, I guess it was published about 6 years ago or something like that. So they did, very high precision mass spectroscopy type of radiocarbon dating, so redating the several different pieces of this mat, and it put it solidly in the Chalcolithic. In fact, pushed the date earlier. So really.
All right, so you hear what I'm saying? So we know that this culture would be a little earlier than the Israelite culture. And it has materials that we know that these are not Israelites, nor are they Shemites, nor are they Semitic. So that's important. We're actually gonna know where they came from, what they become. All right, so watch what it says here. We find that the individuals buried in Pekin cave represent a relevantly genetically homogeneous population. So it's saying that they're kind of related, right? This homogeneity, how to say that, basis connection is evident not only in the genome-wide analysis, but also in the fact that most of the male individuals, 9 out of 10, belong to Y chromosome haplogroup T. So it's letting you know that this group had a T group there. So this is going to be kind of important, that this is going to be one of the groups that come down there kind of early, and it's going to have an early arrangement, right? It says a lineage thought to have the first diversified in the Middle East. This finding contrasts with both earlier Neolithic and Epo-Paleolithic Levant populations, which were what? What was there before? What groups were in the Levant before these other groups that moved down? As it says, which were dominated by what? Haplogroup E. So that lets you know that what? E was what? Earlier in the Levant, but not the earliest, because we talked about this when we went over the Natufian, that E was early in the Levant, but they replaced someone before them. They replaced someone before them, which were those A and B groups that were there. But E is going to be there, and then another group is going to replace them. But they're going to become the quote unquote neo-Canaanites, or the new Canaanites, the groups that's going to come later. So watch what it says here. And later Bronze Age individuals, all of whom belong to who? Haplogroup J. From what? The Sea People's invasions. So very important. So T and J were in the Levant fairly early, but where did they come from, and where they go? Or what line are they? What are they related to? Note those mtDNAs. Remember we talked about that? HV. Where these lines coming from? Remember that K, was that K come from? From U. There's that N. Remember we talked about that N? That N. These are actually from the R group, right? mtDNA. As we can see here, the H right there. We can see right here, the U6. There's an R0. Remember we talk about that? Let's go back to R star. About that. All these are going to be from one family, from R, mtDNA. It's going to be U, which makes K. Remember, U8 makes K. They got your F mtDNA, R0, right? HV, which makes your H and V, and your JT that makes J and T. So back over here. So you see, obviously you see your T's, right? There. And you see your R0, and you see your U's there from the N's with K from U8. So there's your HV there. So remember, we got pretty much everything of those early lines of what we would think it would be there. So that's good. That's going to be very important for the Yahwists building real fast. So notice all the T groups. Notice all those T groups. What now? What line? What women? What is this? What's going on here? Where are these coming from? They're coming from the Indo. That's important. They're coming downwards, and they're settling in the lands, and they're actually Indo-european culture. That actually has a lot of bronze. Not what Israelites came out with. That's not what Israelites came out with. That's very important. So this not going to be an Israelite culture, and it's not going to be a Semitic culture. It's important. But this is going to lead us to what is soon going to become the Canaanites. Because a lot of people, if you look up who are the Canaanites, you can type it down. Let's just type it down just for example. Who are the Canaanites? And most genetic studies or Canaanite, I should have said who are the genetic Canaanites. Right? You've probably seen it. There's a lot of information on it. If this one's not gonna find them, probably just type the question out wrong. Oops. Maybe you'll point out real quick. This will not really point out quick, but some studies they'll tell you right off the bat that apparently for the technically culture of the Canaanites, they found that it was mostly J. One of the brothers had talked about that real fast when we talk about IJK, and then he was talking about how it's mostly J. But let's go about it as we should go about it. So what are we doing? We already established. Let's go back up real fast because now we're going to point out who they are now. Now that we established that, remember, we found out that these cultures here, remember, this is before, what is this before? Let's go back down. This is before this Chaff-tempered culture, right? So you can see right here. So this cultures going back and forth, right? You can see right here that said 4,000, 3,000 BC. But remember, 5,000 BC, they were where? With their women's? They were in the north. So you can see right there, they're gonna be in the north with other said Indo-European lines, which is all right, just true. They just settle in the north, so that's important. But then they come down, they go down, and they're settling in the lands of Levant. And remember, it was dominated by E group, which were the sons of Shem, which also we had connected with the Semitic dialect. And we are going to get a group that's going to be migrating into those cultures, like T, and then later a J that's going to migrate in those cultures. Now, this is very important. Monophyletically, are T also T and J? Does T and J or A or any other group, right? J, for example, does J come from A groups? Because we actually found out that the original Hamitic lines were A and B. So technically, if we're talking now, if you're talking basic science of basic searching on, let's say, if you was to look on Wiki, or if you ask someone, do we all come from A groups? They'll say, yeah, we all come from A groups. But if you look deeper into what geneticists have broke down, and they found out that we don't actually all come from A groups, which is also important. A lot of people will actually start to express that even your genetic Eve isn't technically the root of all women, technically the root of all women, but most likely just might be a line that was basically where modern humans had connections to. But there's even an more ancient line than the genetic Eve. There's a deeper Eve, as there's a deeper Adam, as I spoke about. The genetic Adam A00, there's a deeper Adam that makes him in other lines. Just to kind of bring that home, is that technically A doesn't make J, but J does become the Canaanites. That's going to be something that's important to note. And T and other groups. That's why we're going over it. That it's not so black and white, but we're going to point it out. So remember, we already pointed this out. Massive migration from the steppe was the source for Indo-European languages in Europe. Right, just point this out one more time. Again, why was we pointing out these? Again, ancient from what? Chaff-tempered Israel reveals what? Reveals the role of population mixture in culture transformation. So on there, going to get a good understanding of that group in Israel and its movement and everything. Remember, we talk about this cave here, the lands of Israel at this time frame here, as we had talked about, as we can see on this little video here, right there, 5,000 to 3,000 BC, pretty much 3,600 BC and everything. And again, we know those years are exaggerated, but here it is right there. So that's going to be that time frame, but it's going to tell us some interesting things about this group and how what? It also talks about how the population also what? Appears to have contributed, right, differently to later Bronze Age groups, right? So Bronze Age. So remember, we go into the Bronze Age. So 2000 BC is where we're gonna be seeing those Canaanites. So we're seeing who were they, where they come from, right? But it says one of which we cannot show plausibly have descended from the same population that of Peg and Cave. You see what's going on there? So it's letting you know that later in the Bronze Age, you're going to have some connections to these groups. They're going to continue there as the Canaanite groups. So it's going to be kind of important to take a note. Remember, the Ghassulians came from where? The Zagros and the Caucasus, they say. But that's also what they talk about with the Canaanites, where they came from. Right? We talked about the same thing. But let's look a little more onto the information here. So they're zooming in on the Levant. They're taking a look at some of the things at these caves, right? And they're going to get a good idea on what is going on there. We can see some material culture that's bronze. We have no doubt that this is not Israelites, right? Even some of the cultures that they have there, it shows that they're not even Semitic. In fact, it says right here, previous genome-wide ancient DNA studies from the Near East have revealed that at the time when agriculture developed, right? It's also important to know that these groups were early agriculturalists until the later on when they start becoming farmers, right? They became farmers together. They all worked together to basically become farmers, but they were basically agriculturalists and hunter gatherers. But notice again, when agriculture developed, populations from Anatolia, Iran, and Levant, right, approximately as genetically different from each other, approximately as genetically different from each other as present day Europeans and East Asians are today. Now, hold on. Let's be careful on what we're seeing here. When we're taking a note at present day Europeans and present day East Asians, are they monophyletic? Are Asians going to be basically the same from one root, right? If we go again to F-89, are we going to find out that they actually all link to one root? Yes, that they all are actually going to be genetically. So even some lines in A, where they're Q, whatnot, N, all that, they could be O, they could be Q, and then someone could be European and be R and T and J and or I, and they all are still related. So that's important to know that sometimes they'll say, well, one is a Q group, it's R group, so they must be different. But again, you got to link ultimate nodes so that we can have the full picture of these things, just to get a good understanding. But we're going to get a good understanding of who they're moving from. Remember, I talked about the pre-pottery Neolithic B. It lets you know, obviously, the one in the late Bronze Age. So now we're going to get to right there, 2000 BC. Now we're going from the time of the Chalcolithic. Now we're going to the Bronze Age, right? So we go right here and it shows that the Levant Bronze Age population from these sites in Jordan right here could fit, right? I get this word twisted. Statistically, as a mixture of around 56% ancestry from a group related to Levantan pre-pottery Neolithic agriculturalists, right? Represented by ancient DNA from certain ones and whatnot in areas of Jordan, these little areas here. And then some other ones from basically Iran, Chalcolithic, right? And let's talk about what it says here. Here it go. Right? Here we go. Here's what we wanted to see. Right? This is what it's saying. So this one suggests that the what? Canaanite Levant Bronze Age population from the site of Sidon. Now we're gonna see where Sidon, when we talked about that. Let's look at what do we find in Sidon. Because Sidon is one of the most Canaanite cities. In the book of Judges, it even tells you that they didn't push the Canaanites out of Sidon. Right? Sidon, Tyre, right? These are classic cities that were never taken over by the Israelites at that time. All right, let me open up one more note here as I realize that I do need this note. Amen. Amen. That's right. That's right. Will, son of Yah, is right. That's right. There it is right there. Getting right to it. That's where they would be. That's the original Hamites would be A and B groups. We found BT and Sidon remains, right? That's true. We did find, point that out at what we find as the Canaanites. And by the time of later Canaanites, this is something that's Marian's. I'll need this right now. Close that. Right, so we're gonna get right to it. But first, let me open up something else here. And as always, all the meat of these notes gonna be in the description. I need to open this one. And I need to open one more note here because I need two pieces. I'm gonna go here. Remember we talked about that BT, right? I'm just gonna show you that we did it there in the lands of the Philistines, right? That's the Philistines. So BT with an L, right? Remember we talked about that. Look at that empty DNA with that BT, right? And we talked about A coming from what? HV from R, right? That's very important. What's that tab? Right here. Let me make sure I'll open this. All right. Real fast so I can point this out. Isn't it deep? That's why it's good to have, go over these things to get a good understanding on the origins of these lineages. That's right. Isn't that right? Be careful on BT, because before that, BT, the root BT, we don't have, no one's the root BT today. Those lines, those people, they're mostly wiped out. But by a little later, we're gonna get like BT dash, what was it, 442 or something like that. BT dash 42, something like that. And that actually would lead more dash M60. So it's a mutation leading to a mutation. Make it clear that BT itself, right? There's a root BT. Always remember when you see an R or a star, like you'll see BT star, CT star, stuff like that, or you'll see mutation. And that's a mutation from. But BT itself, it would be more linked to the Hamitic lineages, early linked to the Hamitic lineages. Let me see where point this one out here from one more source here that I need to type it down. Right here. So now we're going to talk about the Canaanites. So this just said, it just told us that suggests that the Canaanite Levant Bronze Age population. So now we're in the Bronze Age populations from the site of Sidon, right? Lebanon, some of the ones we just shown, but the other ones I was showing was a little younger. But it's going to say could be modeled as a mixture of what? Of the same two groups, albeit in different proportions. They'll say 48% Levant Neolithic related to 52% Iran Chalcolithic related. So again, there's an Iran Chalcolithic again. However, the Neolithic and Bronze Age sites analyzed so far in the Levant are separate in time by more than, they'll say, 3,000 years. 3,000 years, right? They'll try to tell you that before the Israelites are there, these lines are moving about for 3,000 years after the flood. No. Making a study of samples that fill in this gap, such as those from, remember the ones we talked about, that's why we're touching on the Ghassulian. This is why the ones of the Ghassulian from Pek-Kip-In of critical importance. That means you can't understand who the Canaanites are unless you understand the Ghassulians. So these are of critical importance to understand who the Canaanites are. That's why we had to go over do all that. Right. And this is something that I've been building for a while, but now you're going to see the full picture of it. I've been waiting to go over the Ghassulians directly. So let me open up this note. Now let's talk about the ones in Sidon. Now we're going to point out the lines that we actually find in Sidon of the Canaanite people. So the full understanding, BT mixed with H2. Isn't that interesting? Yep. And in fact, that's what we found. We found a lot of the Hamitic sons, haplogroups, early on. Apparently, they must have had some of those N lineages. So some of those lines of those N's might be originally women of Ham. So it may sound, what's the word I'm looking for? Apparently, those lines were dark skinned at first, right? Let me show you what I'm. U lineages were dark skinned to the north and started to change colors. Their diet changed, their different mixes changed how they look. But U5, let me show you something. Let me see how you say his name. Cheddarman has a U5 and an I lineage. But Cheddarman they say was black. But you gotta be careful. That's why we here we don't teach only skin doctrine. Now we do know that a lot of the Israelites were darker skinned, but we gotta be careful on this because we can also understand that there are other groups with darker skin. For example, a man that was a long time ago, Mesolithic, so 900 BP before present, right? That's like 7,000 BC, something like that. But he would be like the earliest Indo-European line. He had an I Y DNA, but his MT DNA was not one that you would expect to have darker skin. But his mitochondrial DNA was U5, and that's what we found with the A lineages, U5 directly. U5 also is in Carthaginians, That's actually important because this line actually was originally dark skinned. U5. I talked about it when I was talking about the pigmentation change of the Turks and things like that. And I was talking about how how this changes of skin color can happen and things like that. But this person would have dark brown skin, dark hair, and like light color eyes. But it seems that some of these mtDNAs, it might have been this is what I'm starting to see, and I'm gonna do a study on mtDNA. Thing I didn't even know it was bugging on me real fast. But let me just summarize what I was summarizing. I was summarizing something real fast with the mtDNA, and let me just make this clear. Genetic Adam and Eve would root deeper than A00 and deeper than L0. That they would actually be as your biblical Adam and Eve. They would basically make every single human. But then about the time of Noah, so about this time here, at the time about Noah, so this will represent Noah. So having their generations, and then Noah would enter into the frame, and then there would be a mutation. There would be a mutation that would happen, right? And basically, Ham would catch the ancestral state. He would catch the ancestral mutation, basically showing the ancient lines of Noah that would go deep. And um, Japheth and Shem gets a ancestral derived state. They get quick mutation. They get mutations, and that's why especially Japheth, the firstborn, has some very a lot of mutations. He has a lot of mutations, a very large line as well. But when we're talking about the mtDNA, it's possible, just to make it quick, that some of the A groups apparently got with those L's early on, right? And that's why sometimes when they look at the ancestral state of A, they think it's really old because it has a lot of SNPs, and SNPs don't equate to years. So that's just something that's important to know, that SNPs don't actually equate to years, but rather we gotta go about it more careful. That actually, this line actually shows that it has an ancestral state of Adam. It still has the ancestral mutation. That's why when they talk about A00, you've probably seen some of the studies on A00, that A00 is compared to the genetic Adam, and it has almost every SNP pretty much. But these lines right here these both share mtDNA of M and N and L to 6 to 7. So these ones kind of like share that. And these ones also pick that up. So the women, there's no real consensus, real scientific proof that every single of these started off with an L0. That's what I'm saying, is that L0 might not actually be Eve, as some may say is Eve, but it would actually be what you would consider an early line that separates from other early lines. Everything. That's just an answer to one of the questions on there, one of the statements. Amen. That's really interesting that your mtDNA is M6. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on that real fast. We'll need what I'm saying. All right, let's get deep into this last piece real fast. Okay, so back over here. So this is why this is important. That the again, the Canaanite, to understand the Canaanite culture, it is critical. It is critically important that we understand the Ghassulian culture from that territory, from Pekeb in. So it's critical that we understand that. So I'm reading it one more time. Canaanite Levant Bronze Age population from the site Sidon. So let's go to Sidon. So remember how he's pointing out Ashkelon and the Philistines and everything, from about the time the Sea peoples, that they have B, T, and L groups of those Sea peoples and everything. And also, let me actually open up something here. Let it open up real fast and point out Sidon. What's going on there? Let me refresh this note. All right. There we go. That's why I always try to make sure I'm checking the sound as I go, because I started some reason always having little while doing these. All right, so let me point out what we see in sight. So remember again, right? So it's letting us know who were the Canaanites and where were they, right? Obviously, the Canaanites are going to be in some major places, and one of the most major places is the place where we always get the Canaanites in Sidon or Tyre. Sidon and Tyre was not taken by Israel. Let's take a look here. So not this one, but this one right here. Everything opens up for me real fast. This one, I don't know what's up with that one. I'm not sure what's going on there. That's why I always have a copy of notes, because sometimes you have some. So this is just opening up. Let it in because this note is kind of big. But I'm gonna point out genetically who we found as the Neo-Canaanites, like the actual Canaanites. Because remember, Canaanite. Why this note is not open? Remember, Canaanite and everything. Let me close it and reopen that. It's not the same as Israelite, even though they're in the same land. It's different in Israelite culture, right? And not every culture in the land of Israel is a Canaanite. But this is what we're going to show is a Canaanite culture. And remember, it has connections to the Ghassulian culture. So the Ghassulian culture is going to lead us to what is the Canaanite culture. It's critical to understand that. Very critical. That's what it's letting us know. It's very critical. Let me see. All right. I'm gonna point this out here. I'll make sure I edit out that little gap that just happened there. Let this thing open up real fast. All right. All right. Right there. See this thing pops up for me real fast. And I'll point it out in another note, because it looks like this note is misbehaving. I don't know why it's misbehaving, but this note looks like it's misbehaving. I'll point it out because we got one on here as well. Here's some studies of some Canaanites. I'll show you some, but I want to show you this one from Sidon, but this is not opening up for me. I don't know why. Every other's opening up, but this one. Let's see. Again on one of these ones. Try one more time on this note. Otherwise, I think it'll open up. Let's see. It's quite odd. This one note is just obvious. Let's see if it opens here. If not, I'll just put it in the video after description. The paper that actually has there's a J1 and J2 that they found in Sidon. I don't know why it's not opening up for me now on that. But alternate one. Yeah, it's not opening up. I'll close that. But we got J1, J2 in Sidon, right? And just to point out some other Canaanites just for the sake. Let's see if I can point out here. All right. Just to point it out. So right here, this is just a study with. Remember, I was talking about how the Ghassulians came from the Caucasus Mountains. So it says right here, Caucasus of Zagros. It says here we set out to address three issues. First, we sought to determine the exact of or the extinct of the genetic homogeneity among the site associated with Canaanite material culture. So that's letting you know that the cultures that we're looking at here, these are Canaanite cultures, right? Second, we analyze the data to gain insights into the timing, right? And just talks about the origin of gene flow that brought Zagros and Caucasus related ancestry to the Bronze Age southern Levant. So you see what's going on there? Just to kind of make it take it home, because we had touched on this, right? Here's one on Zidon, has JP58, and we talked about how Sidon also is the Greeks, right? Sidon is the Greek naming fishery, right? Basically a fishery for the ancient Phoenician port city of Cydonia, right? Sida, in what is today Lebanon, right? So that's what we were showing on that right here for the Philistines. That's why they'll say that some groups, they'll say that the people in Lebanon are the Canaanites. They'll say that's what they'll say. But doesn't get the full understanding of the picture here. That the Canaanites, especially in the city of Megiddo, they also had those same pretty much. Is that the ones that were placed down there during the time of Israel? They were called the Canaanites. They became the culture of the Canaanites. Came from, of course, in the Caucasus Mountain, but they themselves. Remember, that's why we're looking at that time frame until the Iron Age, when the other Philistines come there too, add on to them. We know that the Canaanites, these are going to be the Canaanite groups. These groups. I'll put this note in the description if you want to get more deeper into it. This goes over that. You'll see that basically right underneath the study right here of Yemen, and this some picture, and then you'll see this little basically flyer right here that basically talks about some migrations. And remember, one of the brothers was talking about it too, that the Canaanites, the strength of migration from the east of the ancient Near East, the fact that this migration continued for many centuries, so it continued for many centuries, may help to explain why rulers of city-states in Canaan in the late Bronze Age carried what? Non-Semitic Hurrian names. Didn't the brother just say that earlier? That they might be Hurrians, right? They got Hurrian names, right? From the Zagros and Caucasus Mountain. But they came down and became Canaanites. So here, Hurrians have connections to the ancient Canaanites. There were strong and active connections between these regions throughout movements of people that helped to understand the shared elements of culture. So you see what's going on there? Just to show that one. Right. We had another note that, so who are the Canaanites? Right. It's over and talks about that going from the time of after the Ghassulians to the Canaanite time frame. So it's after the Ghassulians, instead of the Ghassulians from the Zagros and Caucasus Mountain are actually the Canaanite groups that stayed there for a long time. So they stayed there for a long time, and they were the Hurrians. Right? So it's letting us know about these groups. And we went into some more deeper studies of it. And we know the one citing is that group. Let's go back down so we can bring it home. Bring it home on what's going on here. That's why the Ghassulian is important. The Ghassulian is a bronze working culture, worked with bronze, right? Gonna be very important. Go down a little bit and basically summarize it right here. All right. So that's why it was important to know that this group would be that group. So I guess in summary, right? In summary, to summarize it, to bring it home and everything, is that again, the ones from the Chacalentic and the Zagros mountains that have ties to U.S. Isham and all those. Apparently, what happened? This is apparently what happened. Apparently, after some of the AB sons of Ham was replaced by DE sons of Shem, they settled in the lands of the Levant for a while, and Japheth wasn't there yet. All of a sudden, about the Neolithic time, Japheth's lines start popping up there. Now they were very powerful, and they dominated the Levant with a new technology of bronze, and they introduced iron. They dominated the Levant a lot when the Sea people came in with iron, and they took over the Levant. So that's why it's important when going over these things. But they're not genetically Canaanites, but they're culturally Canaanites. But they're not genetically Shemites either. They're going to be a group that becomes the group of what is called the Canaanites, is what actually they found, that it is a deep connection to the culture of the Canaanites. Okay. All right. All right. So now let's I did today. What about the Hittites? That's why we was looking at that the Hurrians and the Hittites became one peoples. That the Hittites were also Indo-European peoples. The Hittites also became basically the same thing as the Hurrians and the people from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountains. Right? Amen, amen. Why did it say YDNAL? T was the goods, and L is also related with T, and that became some of the Canaanites. L became some of the Canaanites. It was J, L, and T that became Canaanites, and BT that became Canaanites. But the ancient bloodline Canaanites is going to be your A and B groups. That's why we was point out that ancient modern human that was in the Levant before the Shemites got, before the Shemitic language started to develop there from the Afro-Asiatic branch. Okay, but let me see. Let's see where is that. I'm gonna point something out here. Let's see where is it. So remember, that's why we was looking at this cave. That's why we was looking at this cave, right? It had those T groups with those mixes of those said mtDNA mixes, as we see right here. These are the mtDNAs. But remember, they was mostly T. They had like one E still there because that was the Semitic groups that was still in the Levant. But T came down a little later and start changing a couple things of the cultures, but they were Indo-European from the Indo-European cultures. So that's what was something to know about that group that it came there. But then later on, all of a sudden, another Indo-European son came down, and he wanted to rule the Levant with T, and he did. So he took Megiddo, and that was J group that came down and took the areas of Megiddo, and that was about 4,000 BC. Well, about 2,000. That's about 2,000. My dad, not 4,000, about 2,000 BC. So that's like, that is about the time of the rise of the said Canaanites. These are going to be the rise of the Canaanites. As you can see, a lot of J's come down there, and they become the Canaanites. Remember, they're going to be also from those Indo-European groups. But that's who become mostly. It was T, L, J. All those other things were not. But those will be the groups that end up becoming those Canaanite groups in those lands, whatnot, just to kind of give understanding of that. But that's where they came from, is that they came from some of the Indo-European movements and everything. It's about let's see, there's a close time frame, right? There's F-M89. Remember, F-M89 is the father of all these lines, right? F-M89 even makes J, and even makes R, even makes T, right? So you see what's going on there in these areas, right? So these are actually the Canaanites. So the Canaanites is actually a mingled company, but mainly of T and J and of L. That's very, very important, that they actually came from the north downwards. They came from the north downwards. That's going to be very important to understand, that they're going to be a culture that becomes and considers itself, just like how some cultures become the Hittites and all the other things. A lot of cultures end up replacing the ancient culture there. But it all started when the group started basically moving from the upper north and adapting and taking in the lingua franca of that land. So remember, before they were even there, we know that F-M89 was there, but F-M89 shows that it was all throughout Europe for a long time with those mtDNAs. And it was in a lot of different places for a long time. But it did go to the lands of Levant, F-M89. And that's why notice this will be the sons of Japheth that makes those mutations, that those mutations come from. But they will also be in the lands of Jordan, right? So F-M89 is a very important, valuable piece to understand when going over it, because it's going to break it clear. It's going to break the pieces clear. So that's who becomes the Canaanites. Let's summarize it. Before questions, while we summarize, before I summarize, let's do a summary on everything that we touched, and we're going to expound on it, on what we just did. You can expound on what, yep, that's right. We're going to do that too. Can you expound on what you said about BTs? Because my uncle, yep, and that's what I kid you not, I was just thinking about you because I was watching that video that we did when we was touching on BTM42. And BTM42 is a mutation that is deeper than that. It's a little deeper than BTM42. It goes a little deeper. But whoever got that mtDNA test, I don't know where he got his test from. Was it family tree DNA or whoever it was? But if they did go to family tree DNA, they might need to do a big Y test to see exactly what he is. It might lead to BM60. That line, that's the one we was talking about. That might lead to BM60 with that one. But if we're talking BT, just be careful. Like there's BT star, which is a root BT, and then there's mutations from BT, like you see there, BTN42, but deeper. It gets deeper than that. You're gonna always have BTN42 with deeper mutations. Wasn't the altar the sons of Ham? That's right. The original Hittites were A and B groups of Ham, the original Hittites. But again, notice this is why we wanted to summarize this. Let's go back up to the Ghassulian ancient culture. You see how old this culture is here? Let me actually open up something here and show you something. I want to show you. This is why I always have material papers so that we can see actual details of these lines. I'm going to show you that like we seen with Cheddar Man, the A groups actually were older with the U5 group. A groups actually were with U5, and that's why that U5 had darker skin, like Cheddar Man, right? We seen what we just showed earlier with Cheddar Man, just to kind of show that, right? And he has a U5. He has U5. I'll show you something here. There's U5, and I'm going to show you that the women of this line were basically Hamites. That these were the original Hamites. I'm going to show you. This one looks very old, doesn't it? That age right there. You would think that this one must have been the oldest with U5. This I Haplogroup must have been the oldest with U5. You would think. But let me show you something real fast. I want to show you, because remember, A and B was the original Hamites, but something happened, and the Hamites got conquered. Right. And I remember we did a little study on Ham, on all the roots of Ham and everything. And we talked about how basically Ham has settled in the Iran area and also other areas. I don't know why is this not open? Let me see if are these notes misbehaving. Not that one. This one is. Some notes are misbehaving. I don't find out why. But let me go to the one that I want. That's not even what I want. All right. At least this one will open up. All right, so let me show you here. All right, let me open this up here. So I'm going to show you what happened early on with him. And why the later Canaanites are not actually Hamites, but they're still Canaanites. Just like the Hittites are not initially of Heth of Ham, but they are still Hittites. And they are just a mingled company. All right, so let me show you something really interesting that I think was very interesting that I've seen just recently. All right. Let me find it here. Or there it is, home. Fine. All right. Make sure. I'm gonna go to a certain one here. So a lot of U5s obviously is a line of the north, right? But I'm gonna point out this certain one that's just at. So this is obviously you can see these ages are very high up, right? Like this one. But notice it's with an I group, like Cheddar Man. I group like Cheddar Man, right? That makes sense. But let me just show you something here. Let me just disable this. All right, let me just scroll and find it. All right, so there it is right there. So right there, you see that? You see this A group right here in the lands of France? But notice it's with a U5. That's why U5 is made dark-skinned individuals, because this actually started off with an A. Let me show you. So there was some A's that started off with L, but that's why I was showing you this. Well, that's a lot of these lineages actually start off with different female lineages. That there would be different ones with different female lineages. That it's possible that Ham, Shem, and Japheth, when they got there, could have had the same exact mutation, because we don't know if they were sisters. We don't know if they were complete strangers, those women that Ham, Shem, and Japheth got with. But we know that later on, even early on, Ham, Shem, and Japheth basically mixed with almost all those different women. So here's an A group in France, but look at that year. Look at that year. This is way earlier. This one's way earlier than even than Cheddar Man. This means that this early line that also got with U5 right here also was near that A group that got with U5. That would be the actual original Hamites, and that was the one from leaving the lands of the Hittites. So that's leaving the lands of the Hittites. So they would be in the area of Hatti, going upwards into the lands of France. So spreading very early on in early times, right before the time of Babel. So this is before language, maybe before division of language. So this would be before Babel. So remember, Ham was mostly in the north, because we know Canaan was in the north with Noah, right? Canaan was in the north with Noah. So that's very important. And we had pointed this out before with a lot of these A groups that were in the north, right? Some that was in Chaz Republic, right, with a U group. Another one with U5 in Chaz Republic, right here. And look at these years. These are astronomical years that we're seeing there. But obviously, again, the years are exaggerated. That's important to know, as we went over this before. But that's important to know that these A groups were with those U lineages. That's why Cheddar Man was probably why Cheddar Man was dark skinned, because of the fact that he was actually with a line that moved into lands of Africa later. But Ham may have been had contributed a genetic flow, right? He may have contributed a genetic flow into that female. So that could have been how those lines became Canaanites, that they started mixing with these women and started to become dark skinned. In fact, I can't open up this note, but I wanted to show you that the ones we found in Sidon, the J groups, even the ones we found in Sidon were dark skinned, like Cheddar Man. And Cheddar Man had the same females, and also that those ones in Sidon. Notice, look, A group still in the lands of Chaz Republic. This is the Bell Beakers, but now he got with an H group. So A group got with an H group. So that's very important. That early on, the A groups were mixing. And if him, let's say this A group was him, right? And let's say he had a daughter, right? Let's say he had some daughters. And let's just put down some of his daughters. Let's say some of his daughters had U5. Let's say some had some H, and let's say some had some other lineages. I'm just gonna leave it like that. I'll just leave it like that. And let's say Helm also got with these ones. This would make them Helmites. That would make those. When I say quote unquote Helmites, they're genetically related to Helm. That's what that means. Just like how Helm can get with a L3 or L2 later on, he can also get with an L1, right? A groups can get with L1 early on, but we know they start off with L0, the earliest ones. But they also can get with M and N and have some of these. So those females being daughters of Ham, later daughters of Canaan, they could be daughters of Canaanites. And then they can get with anyone, and guess what? They just made it with a Canaanite. They had a baby with a Canaanite. That means that in a way they're partially Canaanite. So you see what's going on there, and then becoming one with that culture, they become Canaanite. In fact, you see this L0 right here. Remember we was pointing out how J had mixed with some of the Canaanites and everything. We've seen that evidence of J with the Canaanites. We also got J with L0. We know that one had mixed there. Now, let me make it clear. I don't think every L0 is a Canaanite. There could have been an L0 that are L0s and could have got with Shem, or could have got with fifth, right? This one is here. This one with a line of J, but right, this male is also born as right here. This is J1A2B. This is JP58, J1A2B. But notice this J1A2B got with, as we see here, a L0. L0 is what it got with. So it must have been meeting up with some of the lines that move upwards, right? Not every L0 is the same and everything. It's very important because apparently I met someone that was L0 that apparently had a mixture of Natufian. That means you must have mixed with some of the E groups early on. So that's very important. That there is evidence of obviously L0 with the A groups. There's also evidence of it may have been with some of the Natufian. Right? I didn't see that evidence yet for the L0 with the Natufian, but I would love to see that. But from what I see, that L0 was mostly with A groups. And this one that became the Canaanites also mixed with that L0. So, and also it has that L5s and other things like that. And they were darker skin. I don't know why that note is not opening up, but I have a note where we go over the exact details of the person, the autosomal breakdown and everything. That it proves that the person in Sidon had a continuity with people that will be connected to Canaanites, pretty much. Not Israelites. Not Israelites. They were Canaanites. It's very important. This is what we had seen there. A major understanding of that mixture in that land. And let this thing open up. So you can hear. So that's why we had did this right here to express that if an A group that may have started with an L group had a U5 or H daughter or even an L daughter, then if this group, let's say a J, let's say a J, right? Let's say YDNA J and T. Let's say YDNA J and T decided to get with these. That would make them a Canaanite. That would make the descendants that's born from them, if they're in the land of Canaan, not only are they genetically Canaanites by the autosomal mixing, but they're also Canaanites by the culture and in the land. That's important. So that's kind of like what happens is that all of a sudden one line from another family gets with the women of another family, and they produce what they are, what they would be. Hold on. Let me finish this because my boy wants attention. All right, let's summarize again. Let's finish the summary of what we have in here. So that's why we understand that L0 is not the ultimate root of all women, but it is an early root of women, but it separates from other women. But A will be the original Hamite, men of Ham. And any woman who would be born from him will be a daughter of a Hamite, a daughter of Ham. And then if she got with someone else, that would also make that son that would be born from them. Let's say they have a son. We will all of a sudden, let's say we can have a J plus L0 or T plus some U5 or H or something like that. That got with this one. That's what you'll see. You'll have the Y sun line, and then you'll have the mtDNA line from the lines that they have mixed with. And that's who we'll see would settle in the lands of the Canaanite area and become the Canaanites. So you can see, obviously, this BT is with an H. Remember, we just point out that A group got with an H, this BT with an H, and this L with an H. So you'll have an interesting mix like that. That's what you'll have. You'll have these interesting intertwined mixes. I'll see if this is enough. I was showing this today, right? Talk about Cheddar Man, the breakdown of Man and his Y DNA, and originally dark man, right? But later on, as this line kept mixing with groups, right? They actually having a natural, what is it, SLC, was it 25A2, something like that. But this group later got light pigmentation, right? It's kind of like what you think, like the Statue of Liberty, like starting off as bronze, and then over time, all that shade going away and everything, all that light skin, all that light skin start coming in, right? All those things and whatnot. So this is important to know when talk about some origins and everything. So that U5 was obviously up in the north, right? It was a line that was in the north. We had talked about before. It was over here, but Hamites went and mixed with them. They end up mixing with these lines and a lot of lines, and they started becoming dogs of Ham. Long story short, and that's how some that settled in the lands also mixed with some of those ones. And we was pointing that out. For example, we can go over the exact mixture, right? Just to point it out, that a summary of that autosomal mix, right? Because remember, doing a test on modern people's autosomal today will only trace about 500 years back. But to get a full link how old they are, you need to do a PCA, right? A principal component analysis. You got to look at the deep information of those things, and also other pieces of information. But here's what we know is that in the southern Levant, all of a sudden you get Zagros and Caucasus Mountains coming down. They mix with the women, right? The Zagros and Caucasus Mountains coming down from the Chalcolithic time frame, right? And then they're going on, continuing for the Bronze Age, right? So they continue for the Bronze Age and the Iron Age as the Canaanites. Notice not there. That's the cutoff right there, right? Iron Age, Bronze Age. The Canaanites are the ones from the Zagros Mountains that mix with the women. That's what they are. And then they settle in the lands of Canaan. So they come from the north, they mix with the women of Ham, and they settle in the lands of Canaan, and they are Canaanites, and they are genetically Canaanites, right? They're not men of Ham. Some may be, like the BT maybe, but most of them are actually going to be a mingled group that mix together and become one. They become Canaanites, settle in Sidon and all these different places here. And that's what we see. So again, the Zagros Mountains, the Ghassulians from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountain mix with the women, right? They mix with the women, and they become basically what you see today, as we see as what we see, and also the fact of the Canaanites, right? When we talked about that, of the migrations of the Zagros and Caucasus Mountains, that's where this is from. Pretty much, it's tracing that autosomal, all that stuff that we was touching on. That's what this is. The genetic or the genomic history of the Bronze Age Southern Levant. Bronze Age. So that's going to give us Bronze Age Southern Levant. Remember, where was Israel at that time? 400 years, 430 years in Egypt, African plate. But this group came from the north, Zagros and Caucasus Mountains, and they are also going to be, as it says, the inhabitants of the Southern Levant in the Bronze Age are commonly described as Canaanites. So these are going to be the ones in the lands of Canaan. And when, as it says, the term appears in the second millennium BC. So that's important to understand that many nations contest to it, right? A lot of nations, Syrian nations, other nations contest that the Canaanites popped up and about that time, 2000 BC, right? And remember, we had seen a lot of information, right? Going back to the root of the start of the first thing I showed you, why that is, because as it says, right? Remember, we was looking at the fact that the Canaanites that even went to Carthage, right? We know that they had U5. Remember, I pointed that out, that the Carthaginians had U5, like the Canaanites having U. And you can see right here, they also have Baal worship. But what do we know about the pottery? It came from the Zagros and the Caucasus, not from the, what's the word? Not from Africa. As it says, the style of the jar owes nothing to the tradition of North Africa, but can be traced back to Canaan in the second millennium BC. And then we followed the whole history of where did it come from in Canaan, that it came from the Caucasus and Zagros Mountains, as it says right there. That, and one more time, we know, going back here, right? One more time, we know that, again, that we're in that area actually came from the Zagros Mountains, as it says right there, right? Remember that cave we was talking about? A study of the Chalcolithic individuals from that cave, the Ghassulians, right? Of the Ghassulians. It just talks about as they was in Galilee and all that stuff and whatnot. And it says right here, it says, in addition, component related to earlier Anatolian farmers, because they were in Anatolia, they became the Hittites as well. They became the Hittites and the Canaanites, which are excluded as a substantial source for other Bronze Age groups from the Levant, right? Very important, with the exception of coastal groups of Sidon and Ashkelon. So it's letting you know Sidon and Ashkelon are related, but it's letting you know that not every group was these Canaanites, but this group, the group of the Ghassulians that became that group, and that J group that came in that mixed with some of those women's from the pretty much the Levant. And it's also important to know that we see that this lineage, this line here that we're talking about, has connections to the ones of Sidon, the Phoenicians, and Ashkelon, the Philistines. So that's going to be very important. That is giving us a good understanding of what's really going on, the true picture of these things, right? And we already confirmed that F-M89 had went into that area early, right? So it's going to bring all those families together monophyletically, right? So that we know the difference. So that when T comes there, we know that it's not all of a sudden we're going to think that it popped up out of nowhere, but rather it's descending from his father's lineages, right? It's going to have some interesting mixes with some things, right? Obviously those H's and those things from those U's, whatnot. Like K comes from U, whatnot. Very, very important. So that's pretty much the summary there. Let me make sure we hit everything. Go down a little bit. Make so holy see we can't. Yup, isn't that important? That's why the most that's why the most do not give your daughters to them. Do not to them and nor their daughters, because it would have made you them. It would have made you them, and you would have had an allegiance with them, because that's what Mesopotamia was doing. You can look at almost any culture. Look at the great powers of Mesopotamia, the ancient great powers of Mesopotamia right before the Bronze Age collapse, right? Very important to understand that at that time, we know that those nations were marrying each other, right? And they were calling each other brothers. And that was allegiance. It's really the allegiance and the idol worship that God wanted to keep people away from. And the fact of that, because they'll be mixed together. If you also notice that men that mix with the women of Israel, they're technically Israelites, right? Because as it says in the law, in the third generation, they'll become one. It's the same thing. Imagine a man keep mating with the same one, they're going to be the same at some point. Amen, amen. Yeah, there it is. SLC 25A5. A5, not 42. It's the light skin. That is a real gene for light skin. SLC 25A5. But the one SLC 45A2, that's going to be for dark skin. And some of the Canaanites, we found that. We talked about that before. Will, son of Yah, you may remember, we did a live with this brother named Bug Out, and I was pointing out the fact that we found that in some of the sea people, and we found out that certain people like Tacitus was comparing the Jews to dark-skinned people, but obviously there's a separation between the Canaanites and the Jews, right? There's a totally separation for those. But that's why we was talking. Yeah, the Jews, They had settled in the lands of the Levant, but we got to be careful on their culture and everything. Amen, 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 amen. All right, all right, all right. And I'm a rabbi. I'm just your brother's family. I'm your brother to bring you out the information for pretty much anybody. So let's summarize it. Now you see why we start off with the Ghassulian. It probably how you probably seen it. Whenever I go live, it might start off all slow and stuff, building up, and then all of a sudden we bound all that together. We bound it all together. That's why we was touching on the Ghassulians, because again, right? I'll probably close it, but it's critical. The Ghassulians are critical to know about the Canaanites because it's a continuity of the Ghassulian to the Canaanites, not the Natufian who were placed, but the Ghassulians that actually had mixed with the women that had mixed with the A and B groups, which were the Hamites. So that's something I think is important. So that's why they was talking about this early Bronze Age pottery, right? It's similar to the Koraxis culture in the Caucasus. So that's who actually the Canaanites is. The Koraxis culture that's who becomes the Canaanite culture. So very, very important. Who would be the main groups of Canaanites? J became the main Canaanites, and it was also TNL that had connections to the Canaanites, to the Canaanite culture, but it was mainly J at the time when the Israelites came out. And then they're going to be obviously against groups that originally aren't Ham, but they, what's the word I'm looking for? The Canaanites. So remember, there's always a Neo kingdom, right? There's your Assyrians, Proto-Assyrians, there's your Middle Assyrians, Old Assyrians, and then there's your Neo-Assyrians, New Assyrians. There's your Proto-Elamites, your Old Elamites, Middle Elamites, then there's your Neo-Elamites, the Neo-Hittites, right? New Hittites versus the Proto-Hittite. There's Neo-Empires, right? There's a lot of Neo-Empires that pop up, right? Neo-Sumerians, right? All these Neo-Empires. The Neo-Canaan is actually the one that pops up in 2000 BC. So that's going to be very important to know. And they're going into the Ghassulian and different continuity. Any questions? Let me know. Otherwise, again, right? Full understanding that came out, they didn't have metal. They didn't have metal to work with. What is this? First Samuel 13 and 19 that we read. When we read that now there was no smith found throughout all the lands of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords and spears. Right? And the roots of certain lines of mtDNA that R star actually made a lot of those lineages, but some of those women of R star got with some Hamites, and that would add that autosomal connection to those lines that end up mixing in with some of those lines and everything. We talked about F-M89 and how that's related to a lot of those groups to close them. I cut out on a part in the middle here, the video we're doing. Let me show a little piece on this one right now. Pause that. If you haven't seen the one on the Natufian, that's a couple plays on the in the description here. I even put the video. I think we can see. If I put the video here. There's just these are some videos. Here's a video. It's a video I think I did right here. And then just some extra videos and stuff. These are videos on the Natufian that we did. Close that real fast. All right. And that. All right. So with that, that's all I got for you today, family. Just going to close those things. So when it comes to the Bible and the time of Abraham, when it comes out, is the picture is not so black and white, right? When we talk about who everyone is, right, it's not so black and white. It's just not so black and white. Rather, we have to remember that the Levant, Mesopotamia went through many culture replacements. That yes, the first, especially those names, will be the first group. And remember, just because a son of Canaan can rule Canaan, he can be a full-blooded A group. He could be a Hamite of an A group, and it can only be like 4 of them that run the whole empire, and everybody else serve them, and they're whole different lines. Just because the land can be named off of Canaan, that doesn't mean the land is filled with only sons of Canaan. It actually just means the land is named after them. But during the time of Israel and 2000 BC to 1000 BC, those Canaanites were the J groups and the T and L groups. And the E groups would be the proto-Shemites, while the A and B groups would be the proto-Hamites. But the later IJK sons of T and J, especially J, apparently mixed with some of the Hamitic ones and became, as we see, basically connected. They basically had a genetic merging that happened. That basically these lines merged. Ashkelon, right? These lines of Ashkelon and other lines, they became one. They became one group, and that's before the Israelites came out of the wilderness, right? So that's very important for that time to get a good understanding of it. That this is actually what we will find as the Canaanites. And that's why I said the picture may be a little more complex than it seems. But yet, if we want to find the Phoenicians, we got to find the early seafarers, and we got to find the Ghassulians and connect them autosomally, PCA, to find them exact 100% to who they are. So with that, family, that's all for you today. That you got something from this. With that, you be blessed. Make love. And shall I read some of these before we end it? I will do, it'll be accepted. Not into the Most High comes. Not into the Most High comes. But we can definitely prove it with sources. Yep, that's right. That's the right one. SLC 25. I mean SLC 24A5 is the light skin variant, and SLC 45A2 is the dark skin variant. That's right. Amen. With all this information, why is E1B1B accepted as Shemite and not E1B1A? Isn't that interesting? It's probably because they look at the cultures today and think that's how it looked back then. They think wherever people are today, that must have been where they were back then. So they'll see an E1B1A in Africa and they say, oh, these must have always been African. But that's why looking at genetic papers are going to tell you the truth. That really E1B1A is not Mesolithic, nor is it Paleolithic, nor is it Neolithic in Africa. That's important to understand. But it migrated into there. But yes, they know E1B1B is Semitic. No doubt. But we know the truth. So we'll always keep the truth. And we found that E1B1 groups are the Shemites. And in fact, leads to the Israelites that autosomally mix by a certain mixture of women. But not the ones that we talked about today. Today, we point out the Canaanites. The Canaanites were, again, summary of what 1 minute summary of what it is at the time. The Canaanites are a people that came from the north. They came down and they ruled over the Levant. They took over the Levant, but they are originally Indo-European groups. But they came from the Caucasus and the Zagros Mountains. They started to practice different practices. They worked with bronze and later on with iron. And they also introduced Baal. They introduced Baal worship. And that was something that was going on in Levant, and all of them agreed to that. So whoever married with their women, that's why I said, don't give your daughters to their daughters, right? Or nor marry their daughters. That actually means don't make allegiance with them, because that's what they were doing. They were mixing all together, their daughters and daughters. And that's why they had to have a separation like that. So that's important. So and again, also we know that the groups that settled in the lands of the Levant, those were the Canaanites, while the Israelites were developing for 430 years, right? That's a lot of generations that's evolving in the lands of Africa, Egypt. Also, we know when they come out with the rise later on with Jeroboam and Rehoboam, Solomon tries to fight. Remember the king of Israel that God rises up. He flees to the lands of Egypt and develops there for a long time until Solomon dies, and then he comes back to the Levant. So that's actually important to know that a lot of development of Israel was in the lower areas of the African plate, not from the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountains. That's important. Or from even higher, because that's where we went to. We went all the way up to Finland, Russia, right? Even high up, to give a good understanding on that mtDNA mix, and then how Ham actually mixed with some of those, causing them to be daughters of Ham. and then they mix with those ones to kind of give that full understanding on that. So the PCA study from the autosomal information is going to give the truth about the matter, and also the study of the culture is going to give the entirety of the understanding, right? So that's going to be something that is important. Also, we know that in some places there's some E1B1C groups. Remember I talked about that? E1B1C, right? Different things like that. E1B1C, right? That's what I believe is be Esau, right? But with that, that's why we looked at the Ghassulian culture, that's going to be the Canaanites. So with that, be blessed, be beloved, and amen.